Introduction to Selected Poetry on or about the MacLeans. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Selected Poetry on or about the MacLeans, compiled by John Patterson MacLean. Introduction. Gifted with poesy as are the Highlanders and given to the praise of their country and their leaders, it would be expected that many poems would still be extant concerning the MacLeans and their ancestral dominions. To present this question properly requires a wide acquaintance with Gaelic poetry, both published and unpublished manuscripts. The probability is that the greater part of this literature has never been published. In Rev. A. MacLean Sinclair's manuscript collection, entitled Clarsach non Ailínean, are 66 poems either by or else about the MacLeans, only 7 of which have ever been in print. I find others exist in volumes which I do not have access to. I enumerate the following known to me. First, from the Glenbard collection published in 1888. This contains 2 by Ian Lom, 11 by Ian MacLean, 5 by Mary Nine Lacarme, 1 by Mary MacPhail, and 1 by Domhnall MacGillimar. Ian Lom, or John MacDonald, born about 1620 and died in 1709, was one of the most celebrated of Gaelic poets. His poems are numerous, but have never been published in a collected form. On page 18 is his poem on Sir Lachlan MacLean, 1st Baronet of Duart, containing 15 verses of 3 lines each, followed on page 20 by one on MacLean of Duart of 12 verses, each also containing 3 lines. This appears to have been composed when Brolass was guardian of Sir John. It mentions Sir Lachlan Mor, Hector Roy, and MacLean of Brolass. This poem also occurs in Clarsach na Coille on page 244. Of the poems of Ian MacLean, given under Notices of the Poets, the first occurs on page 55 and is on Sir John MacLean of Duart. It contains 6 verses of 4 lines each. This is followed by another on Sir John, page 57, of 19 verses of 4 lines each, followed immediately by 2 others on Sir John, one containing 11 verses of 8 lines each, and the other 15 verses of 7 lines each. The next is the Battle of Alford, a dialogue of 17 verses of 4 lines each. This is founded on a 6-week session of a court of justice held at Arras, Mull. The following MacLeans figure in the poem: Murdoch Og of Lochbuie, Donald of Coll, MacLean of Brolass, Doidam Dana of Ardgour, and Lachlan of Calgary. On page 89, 32 lines of the poem on Colonel Charles MacLean of Drimnin, who fell at Culloden, are given. It is found in Stewart's Highland Bards and in Beauties of Gaelic Poetry. This is followed by 3 more, on Charles of Drimnin, the first containing 6 verses of 8 lines each, the second 5 verses of 8 lines each, and the last, page 97, 8 lines. On page 101 is a poem of 3 verses of 8 lines on the blessing of a house, which belonged to a MacLean who is called the grandson of Charles the son of Alan. On page 102 is a poem of 16 verses entitled The Migration of MacLean of Tresnish. Mayread, mentioned among the poets on page 105, has a lament of 20 verses of 8 lines each on Alan, brother of Donald, 3rd MacLean of Brolass. This Alan was an officer in the army and died in Stirling in 1722. The next, page 110, is a lament for Lachlan MacLean containing 11 verses of 5 lines each. Just who this Lachlan is, the poem does not clearly reveal. This is followed by 2 poems on Sir John and 1 on Sir Alan MacLean. The first, page 112, contains 9 verses of 4 lines each, the second 6 verses of 8 lines each, and the third 8 of 4 lines each. Mary MacPhail, or Mary MacPhail, whose history I am ignorant of, on page 117 has a lament on Hector MacLean, consisting of 9 verses of 5 lines each. The poem does not reveal what Hector this was. Domhnall MacGillimar, or Donald Morrison, appears to have been a native of Coll, but lived in Tiree. On page 119 he has a poem of 13 verses of 3 lines each on Hector, 11th MacLean of Coll. The second book of poems is called Clarsach na Coille and contains 13 by Ambard MacGillian, 1 by Aiken Bacach, 1 by Mary Nine Lacarme, 1 by Andra Mac Anisbuig, 1 by Domhnall Ban MacGillian, one by Aiken MacLean, two by Catriona MacGillian, one by Eganoch, one by Neil MacLauman, one by Gillispuig MacGillian, one by Alistair MacEonhum, one by Domhnall MacGillian, one by Ian Camshron, and one by Alistair MacDumnall. Ambard MacGillian, or John MacLean, is duly noticed in the chapter on poets. The book opens with a poem of 18 verses of 8 lines each on Alexander, 14th MacLean of Coll, followed on pages 119 and 125 by two more, one of 21 verses of 8 lines each, and the other 22 of 8 lines each. To these must be added 5 more ascribed to the Laird of Coll. The first, page 7, has 12 verses of 8 lines each, the second, page 11, the same. The third, page 15, 17 of 8 lines each, the fourth, page 20, 10 of 7 lines each, and the last, page 23, contains 11 verses of 7 lines each. We also have 2 poems addressed to the younger Laird of Coll, which was Hugh 15th. The first, page 26, contains 11 verses of 8 lines each, and the other, page 30, 11 of 16 lines each. On page 40 is a sonnet of 14 verses of 4 lines each, addressed to Reverend John MacLean of Coll. Page 53 is a poem on the loss of Neil MacLean, who was drowned in 1809. It contains 15 verses of 8 lines each. The lament on Archibald MacLean of Scour, page 81, contains 13 verses of 8 lines each. Aiken Bacach, or Hector MacLean, the poet to Sir Lachlan of Duart, has been mentioned under poets. His Song to Sir Lachlan, page 193, contains 14 verses of 3 lines. Mairead Nine Lachane has a song of 11 verses of 6 lines each, dedicated to Sir John MacLean. It occurs on page 204. Domhnall Ban MacGillian, or Donald MacLean the Fair-haired, was a poet of Mull. His song, page 207, on Donald, 3rd MacLean of Brolass, contains 17 verses of 6 lines each. Aiken MacLean, or Hector son of John, or Hector 4th MacLean of Coll, had the honour of composing what afterward proved to be the Song of the MacLeans. It is entitled the War Song of Allan nan Sop. It is composed of 12 verses of 4 lines each. See page 215. Catriona MacGillian, or Catherine MacLean, mentioned under poets, composed a song to Lachlan, 8th MacLean of Coll. It contains, page 217, 7 verses of 8 lines each. Eganoch, called in Gilly's collection Nine Domhnall Gurm, composed a poem, page 223, of 12 verses of 8 lines each, on Donald, 10th MacLean of Coll. Neil MacLauman, or Neil Lamont, was a native of Tiree. When the Montgomery Highlanders went to America in 1757, he composed, page 233, a song to Sir Allan MacLean. It contains 9 verses of 3 lines each. Gillispuig MacGillian, or Archibald MacLean, previously noticed, composed, page 238, a song of 10 verses of 7 lines each on Archibald MacLean of Kilmallock. Alistair MacLauman, or Alexander MacKinnon, born in 1770 and died in 1814, addressed a song, page 257, to the noble of the Clan Gillian. It contains 9 verses of 4 lines each. Domhnall MacGillian, or Donald MacLean, has a song, page 258, of 13 verses of 4 lines each, addressed to Dr. Allan MacLean of the Ross of Mull. Ian Camshron, or John Cameron, who died in Antigonish, Nova Scotia in 1858, inscribes an elegy, page 231, of 14 verses of 7 lines each, to Ambard MacGillian, or John MacLean the poet. Alexander MacDonald, a native of Moidart but living in Antigonish, also writes an elegy to Ambard MacGillian. It contains, page 335, 8 verses of 8 lines each. Mackenzie's Beauties of Gaelic Poetry in 2 volumes was published in 1841 and 1845. It contains 1 by Ian Dub MacIam Icalain, 3 by Aiken Bacach, 1 by Ian MacAlain, and 1 by Callum MacLean. Ian Dub MacLean Icalain, or John MacDonald, was of the Clan Ronald family, and born about the year 1665. His elegy on Sir John MacLean, page 70, is partly given, viz., 15 verses of 16 lines each. Eachn Bacach, or Hector MacLean above mentioned, has 3 poems. The first, page 77, an elegy on Sir Lachlan MacLean of 18 verses and 137 lines. The verses contain 8, 7, and 6 lines. This poem attracted the attention of Sir Walter Scott, who published a free translation of it. A song to Lachlan Og, page 79, of 11 verses of 8 lines each. The last, page 386, is put down as anonymous. It is an elegy on the death of Sir Hector Roy MacLean, composed of 14 verses of 8 lines each. Clan MacLean, or Malcolm MacLean, noticed under poets, composed a song, page 365, of 9 verses of 8 lines each, on his daughter, whom he calls his Nain Dub Thogarach. This has been put into English by Professor Blackie and given as number 8 of this note. In many Gaelic poems not devoted to the MacLeans, reference is made to the Clan Gillian. To hunt these up and make particular reference to them would result in no particular advantage. Those which have been translated into English may be of some interest. Some of these are contained in Hogg's Jacobite Relics in 2 volumes published in 1874. In the first volume are 5 references. In Song 2, the Halls of Cromdale, composed of 16 verses, the 13th is as follows: MacLeans, MacDougals, and MacNeils, so boldly as they took the field, and made their enemies to yield upon the Hawes of Cromdale. Song 16, Three Good Fellows ayont yon glen, contains 5 verses, the 4th being Their Skye's noble chieftain, Hector and bold Evan, Riach Bain Macrabach, and the true MacLean. Song 17, the Battle of Killiecrankie, contains 7 verses, the 5th as follows: Sir Evan Dhu and his men true came linking up the brink man. The Hogan Dutch they feared such, they bred a horrid stink then. The true MacLean and his fierce men came in amang them a man. Nane durst withstand his heavy hand, a' fled and ran awa then. Song 90, the Chevalier's Muster Roll, contains 5 verses, the 2nd being Borland and his men's coming, Cameron and MacLean's coming, Gordon and MacGregor's coming, Ilka Dunnywassell's coming, Little Watchy was coming, MacGillivray's and Ah's coming. In Volume 2 or 2nd series of Jacobite Relics, Song 108, on the restoration of the forfeited estates, contains 6 verses. The 4th reads: MacLeod MacDonald join the strain, Macpherson, Fraser, and MacLean. Though all your bounds let gladness reign, both prince and patriot praising, whose generous bounty richly pours the streams of plenty round your shores, to Scotch's hills their pride restores, her faded honours raising. Sir Walter Scott, in his Lord of the Isles, makes mention of the MacLeans. In Canto 1, in section 15, we read: Full many a shrill triumphant note Saline and Skelastal bade float their misty shores around, and Morvern's echoes answered well, and Duart heard the distant swell come down the darksome sound. In that scene so terrifically portrayed in Canto 2, sections 16 and 17, when the attempted assault is made in Ardtornish Castle by the Lord of Lorne and mainland chiefs upon Bruce, among those who rally to the defence of the latter is the Lord of Duart, brave Torquil from Dunvegan high, Lord of the misty hills of Skye, MacNeil, wild Barra's ancient thane, Duart of bold Clan Gillian strain, Fergus of Canna's castled bay, Macduffet, Lord of Colonsay. As soon as they saw the broadswords glance, with ready weapons rose at once, more prompt than many an ancient feud, full oft suppressed, full oft renewed, glowed twixt the chieftains of Argyle and many a lord of Ocean's isle. Again in Canto 4, section 9, they left Loch Twa on their lee, and they waked the men of the wild Tyree, and the chief of the Sandy Call. Loch Bui's fierce and warlike lord their signal saw, and grasped his sword. End of introduction. Recording by DrPGould. The Isle of Mull by Dugald MacPhail. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. Oh, the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods and the old grassy glens. Though exiled I live from the land of my race in Newcastle, a grey and grimy old place, my heart, thou fair island, is ever with thee, and thy beautiful bens with their roots in the sea. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. There was health in thy breeze, and the breath of thy flowers was fragrant and fresh 'neath the light summer showers, when I wandered a boy unencumbered and free at the base of the ben 'neath the old holly tree. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. Where the Lusa was swirling in deep rocky bed, there the white-bellied salmon with spots of the red, and veins of dark blue, in young lustihood strong, was darting, and leaping, and frisking along. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. And a deft-handed youth there would gallantly stand, with a triple-pronged spear smooth and sharp in his hand, and swiftly he pounced like a hawk on his prey, and glancing and big on the bank there it lay. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. And the red hen was there 'neath the wood's leafy pride, and the cock he was crooning and cooing beside, and though forest or fence there was none on the ben, the red deer were trooping far up in the glen. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. O then 'twas my joy in the pride of the May to list to the sweet-throated birds on the spray, and to brush the cool dew from the low winding glen, when the first ray of morning streamed down from the ben. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. Bright joys of my youth, ye are gone like a dream, like a bubble that burst on the breast of the stream. But my blessing, fair Mull, shall be constant with thee, and thy green-mantled bens with their roots in the sea. O the island of Mull is an isle of delight, with the wave on the shore and the sun on the height, with the breeze on the hills and the blast on the bens, and the old green woods, and the old grassy glens. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Last Harper o' Mull by Tannahill. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. When Rosie was faithful, how happy was I! Still gladsome as summer the time glided by. I played my harp cheery, while fondly I sang o' the charms o' my Rosie the winter nichts lang. But now I'm as waeful can be, come simmer, come winter, it's all ane to me. For the dark gloom o' falsehood sae clouds my sad soul, that cheerless for aye is the Harper o' Mull. I wander the glens and the wild woods alone, in their deepest recesses I make my sad moan. My harp's mournful melody joins in the strain, while sadly I sing o' the days that are gane. Though Rosie is faithless, she's no the less fair, and the thought o' her beauty but feeds my despair. Wi' painful remembrance my bosom is full, and weary o' life is the Harper o' Mull. As slumbering I lay by the dark mountain stream, my lovely young Rosie appeared in my dream. I thought her still kind, and I ne'er was sae blest, as in fancy I clasped the dear nymph to my breast. Thou false fleetin' vision, too soon thou wert o'er, thou wak'st me to tortures unequalled before. But death's silent slumbers my grief soon shall lull, and the green grass wave o'er the Harper o' Mull. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Chieftain MacLean by Evan MacColl. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? When Noah turned seaman, most people agree, man, MacLean of that day had a boat o' his ain. A clansman less famous, though every inch game, is our own gallant chieftain, the other MacLean. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? Away with your grumblers, whom nothing but tumblers of punch and a haggis can tempt to fall in. The fair happy faces that here fill their places, most proud of by far must be Chieftain MacLean. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? Old Scotland's grand story, so pregnant of glory, the ballads that cheered her in days that have been, her songs so heart touching, all hearers bewitching, oh, who would not feast on with Chieftain MacLean? Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? From Ossian and Selma to Lucknow and Alma, such triumphs are linked to the war pipe's proud strain, that fellows who'd hear it, its music to sneer at, had best shun the sight of our Chieftain MacLean. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? Let pinks of perfection themselves verily vexing, a good Scottish reel call a pastime profane. The worst I wish for them would be Tullochgorum, to dance till they sweated with Chieftain MacLean. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? O Scotland, dear Scotland, alas, there's not land enough in thy bounds all thy sons to contain, else not this far west one, but thine own dear breast on, our joys would be perfect with Chieftain MacLean. Up bonnet and feather, up thistle and heather, St. Andrew's good advent is on us again. What Scotsman revering and its memories endearing would not make a night o't with Chieftain MacLean? End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. MacLean's Child, A Legend of Lochbuie. Author unknown. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. The sun rose fair on distant Mull, where ocean heaves its billows high, and o'er Lochbuie the white sea-gull winged its way 'tween wave and sky. The wild pipes uttered their pibroch shrill, and clansmen came from hut and heather, with belted kilt and waving feather, to chase the deer on the misty hill. MacLean was there with his haughty bride, and his only boy in his nurse's arms, and the chieftain looked with love and pride on his infant hope and his lady's charms. "And now," he cried, "thou'lt see what cheer MacLean's dark hills can yield thee here. We'll touch not now the timorous hare that croucheth low in the shady glen, nor whistling plover, nor bonny moor hen, but stir the fawn from its dewy lair, and drive in herds the antlered deer." And straight his clansmen round were spread, or fleet like winds of winter sped the ground to beat both far and near, and drive together the startled deer, where the chieftain's lady with ease might trace the gathering herds and headlong chase. Young Ian, the pride of his native glen, the love of maids and boast of men, was placed alone to guard with care a pass that oped a refuge where the deer might scape the waiting fare. They came and swept the youth away, as a tempest scatters the foaming spray. An angry man MacLean was then, as he saw the fleet herd pass the glen, and the youth came on with head hung low, with shame, but not with fear, I trow. "Go, seize the dog," the chieftain said, "and tear the plume from his dastard head. Strip his coward shoulders bare, why should the tartan flutter there? Go quickly, bind and scourge the wretch, we'll see what blood the rod can fetch, or whether his mother's milk in part still lingers about his childish heart." No words they spoke, but stifled sighs might tell what dimmed the clansman's eyes, and why a shudder went round and round as the lash fell on the deepening wound. No shriek, nor groan, nor stifled sigh was heard to come from Ian's breast. No tear was seen in his fiery eye, but pale his cheeks with the chill of death. his eyeballs strained, and his lips compressed, and his nostrils bled with his laboring breath. At length the scourge away is cast, the thongs are cut that bound him fast, and Ian started bleeding there, and wildly seized the chieftain's heir. And fast away to a cliff he sped, that far o'er the boiling billows hung, and he waved the infant high o'erhead, and laughed till the rocks around him rung. Oh, wildly looked the chieftain then, as shriek and shout filled all the glen, and with clasped hands and bended knee he cried, "Oh, save my only child!" While Ian danced, and shrieking wild, answered thus with fiendish glee: "Come, strip thy back, and let me see the wolfish blood that flows in thee, and then thy gory arms may hold the infant chief that crows so bold." The chieftain stripped, and the red drops fell, for the clansmen urged the strokes full well. "And now," he cried, "my infant give, and thou, I swear, in peace shall live." "Aha!" he shrieked, "go, get thee now, and see in every clouded brow a blushing friend or a biting foe, or follow thy boy to hide thy name, and wash thy back and brow from shame in the boiling waves where now we go." And away he sprung, still laughing wild, the bleeding youth with his chieftain's child. They rushed to the brink of the rocky steep, but the sea had covered its bosom deep, and they heard but the sound of the billows sweep, and they seemed to lull their charge asleep. And the sailors still, as they passed the shore, with shuddering look on cliff and sea, and tell how oft, when the wild winds roar, and their boats on the foaming billows flee, an infant's wail they seem to hear, or loud and shrill on the startled sea the clansmen's shriek and fiendish glee. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. MacLean's Child by Charles Mackay. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. "MacLean, you've scourged me like a hound. You should have struck me to the ground. You should have played a chieftain's part. You should have stabbed me to the heart. You should have crushed me into death. But here I swear with living breath that for this wrong which you have done I'll wreak my vengeance on your son. On him, and you, and all your race," he said, and bounding from his place, he seized the child with sudden hold, a smiling infant 3 years old. And starting like a hunted stag, he scaled the rocks, he clomb the crag, and reached o'er many a wide abyss the beetling seaward precipice. And leaning o'er its topmost ledge, he held the infant o'er the edge. "In vain thy wrath, in vain thy wrath, thy sorrow vain, no hand shall save it, proud MacLean." With flashing eye and burning brow the mother followed, heedless how o'er crags with mosses overgrown, and stair-like juts of slippery stone, but midway up the rugged steep she found a chasm she could not leap, and kneeling on its brink she raised her supplicating hands and gazed. "Oh, spare my child, my joy, my pride! Oh, give me back my child!" she cried. "My child, my child!" with sobs and tears she shrieked upon his callous ears. "Come, Evan," said the trembling chief, his bosom wrung with pride and grief. "Restore the boy, give back my son, and I'll forgive the wrong you've done." "I scorn forgiveness, haughty man, you've injured me before the clan, and naught but blood shall wipe away the shame I have endured to day." And as he spoke he raised the child to dash it mid the breakers wild, but at the mother's piercing cry drew back a step, and made reply: "Fair lady, if your lord will strip, and let a clansman wield the whip, till skin shall flay and blood shall run, I'll give you back your little son." The lady's cheeks grew pale with ire, the chieftain's eyes flashed sudden fire. He drew a pistol from his breast, took aim, then dropped it sore distressed. "I might have slain my babe instead." "Come, Evan, come," the father said, and through his heart a tremor ran, "we'll fight our quarrel man to man." "Wrong unavenged I've never borne," said Evan, speaking loud in scorn. "You've heard my answer, proud MacLean, I will not fight you, think again."
The lady stood in mute despair, with freezing blood and stiffening hair. She moved no limb, she spoke no word, she could but look upon her lord. He saw the quivering of her eye, pale lips, and speechless agony, and doing battle with his pride, "Give back the boy, I yield," he cried. A storm of passion shook his mind, anger and shame and love combined, but love prevailed, and bending low, he bared his shoulders to the blow. "I smite you," said the clansman true, "forgive me, chief, the deed I do, for by yon heaven that hears me speak, my dirk in Evan's heart shall wreak." But Evan's face beamed hate and joy, close to his breast he hugged the boy. "Revenge is just, revenge is sweet, and mine, Lochbuie, shall be complete." Ere hand could stir, with sudden shock, he threw the infant o'er the rock, then followed with a desperate leap down 50 fathoms to the deep. They found their bodies in the tide, and never till the day she died was that sad mother known to smile, the Niobe of Mulla's isle. They dragged false Evan from the sea, and hanged him on a gallows tree, and ravens fattened on his brain, to sate the vengeance of MacLean. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Wild Revenge by Thomas Nimmo. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. 'Tis morning. O'er Hebridean isles, which dot the surface of the deep, the orb of day returning smiles. The spirits of the water sleep. Oh, sweet's the breath of early morn, and bright the glow of eastern sky, and fair the flowers whose tints adorn Mull's wild and rugged scenery. But brighter far than nature's eye is woman's pure and pensive eye, while watching through the dreary night the innocence of infancy. And fairer than the fairest flower that decks the mead or mountain wild are smiles, which in a mother's bower play o'er the features of her child. The matins in Lochbuie's halls are said. MacLean, the doughty chief, with haughty mien his henchmen calls, and gives command in language brief. "Go, let the pibroch of the clan, the gathering, both loud and clear, be sounded from the bartizan. MacLean to day will hunt the deer. His child, Lochbuie's son and heir, his wife, the Lady Isabel, will with himself be present there. Hence, quickly go, thy message tell." The henchman sped, the staghounds bay, the fiery steeds impatient rear, the vassals in their tartan gay with gladsome faces soon appear. The chief with bow and bugle-horn rides foremost with his island queen, the nurse and child aloft are borne within their wicker palanquin. The thrilling bagpipes gaily play as from their drones the streamers fly, the merry clansmen bound away and shout in wildest ecstasy. And now they reach the forest green of pine trees with their scaly cone, where turning round the proud MacLean keen marks his followers, every one. Each gorge and pass he fenced with care, and strictest vigilance enjoined, in order that the quarry there no outlet for escape might find. 12 men of might and stature tall, well armed with lance and studded shield, form quickly at their chieftain's call to tend their lady on the field. A little higher ground to gain they onward moved, and many a prayer is muttered as they cross the plain, for Isabel so bland and fair. The bugles sound, the startled deer fly fleetly as the viewless wind, the shaggy hounds in full career pursue, and leave the woods behind. The bowmen with their weapon bent concealed behind the rocks remain, with sinews braced and eyes intent to lance the barb with deadly aim. But quicker still the red deer flew, the warder's shouts were given in vain, as nearer to the pass they drew, their course to change or speed restrain. With bounding spring and antlers reared in air this furious rush, anon the hard and narrow gorge they've cleared, the hunting of that day is done. Exerted hope can rarely brook the sting of disappointment keen, so told the dark and angry look and flashing eye of proud MacLean. "Seize, bind the slave," he madly cried, "a cur-dog's death his doom shall be, all hope of mercy is denied. Diavel!
bang him on the nearest tree. But no, a refuge in the grave from sneering scorn the coward finds; misfortune's bitter blast to brave belongs alone to noble minds. So let him live. The knotted lash instead of death his flesh shall tear, till blood spurt out from every gash which stains his craven shoulders bare. With lips compressed and dauntless breast the Gael his stripes unflinching bore; no chains of countenance confessed the pain that thrilled through every pore. "Enough!" the chieftain called aloud. The victim's cords were quick untied, and slowly, followed by the crowd, Lochbuie to meet his lady hied. Like sunbeam peering o'er the fells, through musky clouds which sudden roll, she sweetly smiles, and soon dispels the moody umbrage of his soul. With kindly glow his bosom warms, and stooping low upon the plain, he raised the infant in his arms, and kissed him o'er and o'er again. As if by force of magic's power, the clansmen, in their transports wild, join in the greetings of the hour, and bless the lady and her child. The cheetah in the jungle trail creeps stealthily forward as he goes, and if observed he sweeps his tail, and clouds of dust around him throws. As thus concealed he crouching lies, the doe no longer looks behind, relieved from dread of all surprise; she feeds, and thinks 'twas but the wind. But creeping nearer with a bound, the cheetah fixes on his prey, which, felling on the tangled ground, he paws and tears with savage play. So Callum Dhu, with felon aim his direful purpose to conceal, shouts with the crowd in loud acclaim, as if disgrace he could not feel. But, sudden as the lightning's flash, he from the nurse the child has torn, and up the cliff with frenzied dash the infant on his arm has borne. He never stopped, till clambering high the fearful peak at last he gained, and thence he scowled with glaring eye on those who far below remained. He quickly drew his dagger blade, and o'er his heart he placed the child. He wrapped it in his tartan plaid, and stood erect, and grimly smiled. The chief was powerless and appalled. The pale and frenzied Isabel wild shrieked, and for her infant called, as prostrate on the earth she fell. Seemed as if wakening from a trance, 'twas only then the clansmen knew by instinct, or by dint of chance, the vengeful act of Callum Dhu. Infuriate, maddened, forth they bound to scale the steep and narrow path, which up the cliff so slippery wound, from which to swerve were certain death. "Move but a step," he hoarsely cried, "and on this dagger's hilt I swear its blade shall red in blood be dyed of innocence. Take heed! Beware!" The chieftain, with uplifted hands, looks heavenward on the voiceless sky, and tremblingly imploring stands, rack torn with fiercest agony. "One half my lands I'll freely give, all, all," he cried in accents wild, "so that the innocent may live. O save my wife, and spare my child!" Lochbuie, Callum Dhu replied, "Gold can never indemnify for loss of honor, nor can hide the stains of open infamy. Me wantonly you have disgraced, ay me, although full well you knew your confidence was ne'er misplaced when given in trust to Callum Dhu. To me your life you once have owed," and opening his checkered vest, he with his finger proudly showed a cicatrice upon his breast. "To you your angel wife is dear, to me more dear than life and light is Flora, who with soul sincere her maiden troth to me did plight. And am I then so abject now as not to dare her smiles to greet? Yes, I absolve her from her vow, revenge alone to me is sweet. Yet listen, if on bended knee you do now publicly confess how deeply you have injured me, and sorrow and regret express. And farther, if you shall consent to bare your shoulders to the scourge and suffer what I underwent, these perhaps the stain may purge. Yes, yes, thy purpose to recall, I here confess on bended knee, in presence of my vassals all, that I have deeply injured thee. Stripes, torture, death itself I dare," exclaimed aloud the stricken chief, "so that my only child you spare, and thus assuage his mother's grief. The 'stonished clansmen murmured loud, but quailed as them their chieftain eyed, who in the centre of the crowd the agonizing lash defied. 'Twas over, though he could not speak. He, breathing deep, looked wistfully toward the cold and dreary peak which topped the rugged cliff so high. Oh, horror! With outstretched arm the desperate man held up the child, as if he meditated harm. His looks were haggard, dark, and wild. One moment more. With demon glare he bent his arm the child to kiss, then vaulting into empty air both sank into the dark abyss. Oh, who can paint a scene so dread, the howling and the dismal yell enough to rouse the sleeping dead and scare the very fiends of hell? But whence those other sounds of woe which now assail the wearied ear, so mournful, plaintive, wailing low, like moaning winds in autumn sere? Has some illusion of the mind, some airy phantom of the brain, a dream of fancy undefined, awakened up such doleful strains? Ah, no! The accents sad of grief, the passing knell, have mournful knolled, and warned the childless, widowed chief that Isabel in death lies cold. How vain, alas, is human pride, in youth impatient of control! It swells like ocean's raging tide, and saps the barriers of the soul. In after years, as death draws near, its waves begin to retrograde, while we lament with many a tear, and mourn the mocks which they have made. The morn had seen Lochbuie proud ride forth, the idol of his clan. The evening hears him sob aloud, alone and broken-hearted man. For closed in dullness is that ear which mercy never sued in vain, and dims that eye which wont to cheer and make the wretch forget his pain. No longer shall the infant gem of innocence endearing smile. Cut off before its beauteous stem, it sleeps beside Mull's mournful isle. Poor Flora in fantastic weeds wild wanders on the lonely shore, and muttering mournful tells her beads she ne'er shall see her Callum More. Lochbuie's halls are silent now within Iona's cloistered pile. The chief to heaven his life did vow, and never more was seen to smile. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
MacLean's Child by John George Edward Henry Douglas Sutherland Campbell, the Marquis of Lorne. Part I. Dark, with shrouds of mist surrounded, rise the mountains from the shore, where the galleys of the Islemen stand updrawn, their voyage o'er. Horns this morn are hoarsely sounding from Lochbuie's ancient wall, while for chase the guests and vassals gather in the court and hall. Hounds, whose voices could give warning from far moors of stags at lay, quiver in each iron muscle, howl, impatient of delay. Henchmen, waiting for the signal at their chief's imperious word, start to drive from hill and corrie to the pass the watchful herd. Closed were paths as with a netting, vain high courage, speed, or scent, every mesh a man in ambush, ready with a crossbow bent. Aiken, guard that glen and copsewood, at your peril let none by, cries the chief, while in the heather silently the huntsmen lie. Shouting by the green morasses where the fairies dance at night, yelling neath the oak and birches, come the beaters into sight. And before them rushing wildly speeds the driven herd of deer, whose wide antlers tossed like branches in the winter of the year. Useless was the vassal's effort to arrest the living flow, and it passed by Aiken's passage spite of hound, and shout, and blow. Worse than woman, useless caitiff, why allowed you them to pass? Back no answer. Hark, men, hither, take his staff and bind him fast. Hearing was with them obeying, and the hunter's strong limbs lie bound with thongs from tawny oxen, neath the chieftain's cruel eye. More than 20 stags have passed him, mark the number on his flesh, with red stripes of this good ashwood, mend me thus this broken mesh. Ah, Lochbuie! Faint and sullen beats the heart once leal and free, that had yielded life exulting if it bled for thine and thee.
Deem'st thou that no honor liveth save in haughty hearts like thine? Think'st thou men, like dogs in spirit, at such blows but wince and whine? Often in the dangerous tempest, when the winds before the blast, surging, charge like crested horsemen over helm and plank and mast, he and all his kin before him well have kept the clansman's faith, serving thee in every danger, shielding thee from harm and scathe. 'Mid the glens and hills in combat, where the blades of swordsmen meet, has he fought with the Campbells, mingling glory with defeat. But as waters round Eorsa dark and deep then blanch in foam, when the wind Ben More has harbored burst in thunder from their home, so the brow, fear never clouded, blackens now 'neath anger's pall, and the lips to speak disdaining whiten at revenge's call. II. Late, when many years had passed him, and the chief's old age begun, seemed his youth again to blossom with the birth of his fair son. Late, when all his days had hardened into flint his nature wild, seemed it softer grown and kinder for the sake of that one child. And again a hunting morning saw Lochbuie and his men, with his boy, his guests, and kinsmen hidden o'er a coppiced glen. Deep within its open thickets ran its waters to the sea. On the hill the chief lay careless, while the child watched eagerly. 'Neath them, on the shining ocean, island beyond island lay, where the peaks of Jura's bosom rose o'er holy Oronsay, where the greener fields of Islay pointed to the far Kintyre, fruitful lands of after ages, wasted then with sword and fire. For the spell that once had gathered all the chiefs beneath the sway of the ancient royal sceptre of the Isles had passed away. Once from Rathline to the southward, westward to the low Tiree, northward past the Alps of Coolin, Somerled ruled land and sea. Colonsay, Lismore, and Scarba, Bute and Cumray, Mull and Skye, Arran, Jura, Lewes, and Islay shouted then one battle cry. But those isles that still united taught at Harlaw Scotland's might, broken by their fierce contentions, singly waged disastrous fight. And the teaching of forgiveness gray Iona's creed became, not a sign for men to reverence, but a burning brand of shame. Still among the names that ruin had not numbered in her train lived the great clan, proud as ever of the race of strong MacLean. And his boy, like her he wedded, though of nature like the dove, showed the eagle spirit flashing through a heritage of love. Heir of all the vassals' homage rendered to the grisly sire, he had grown his people's treasure, fostered as their heart's desire. Surely safety guards his footsteps, enmity he hath not shown, yet who stealthily glides near him, whose the arm around him thrown? It is Aiken, who has wolf-like seized upon a helpless prey, fearless and fast he bears him where the cliff o'erhangs the bay. There, while sea-birds scream around them, holding by his throat the boy, Aiken turns, and to the father shouts in scorn and mocking joy: "Take the punishment thou gavest, give before all there a pledge for my freedom, or thy darling dying falls from yonder ledge. Take the strokes in even number as thou gavest, blow for blow, then dishonored on thine honor, swear to let me freely go." Silent in his powerless anger stood the chief with all his folk, and before them all the ransom was exacted, stroke for stroke. Then again the voice of vengeance pealed from Aiken's lips in hate: "Childless and dishonored villain, expiation comes too late. My revenge is not completed." And they saw in dumb despair how he hurled his victim downward headlong through the empty air. Then they heard a yell of laughter as they turned away the eye, and they gazed again where nothing met their sight but cliff and sky. For the murderer dared to follow where the youthful spirit fled, to the throne of the avenger, to the judge of quick and dead. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Callum of the Glen by Malcolm MacLean. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. For sure thou art beautiful, faultless to see, No malice can fashion a blot upon thee. Thy bosom's soft whiteness the sea-gull may shame, And for thou art lordless, 'tis I am to blame. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. And indeed I am sorry, my fault I deplore, Who won thee no tocture by swelling my store. With drinking and drinking my tin slipped away, And so there's small boast of my sporin to day. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. While I sit at the board well seasoned with drinking, And wish for the thing that lies nearest my thinking, 'Tis the little brown jug that my eye will detain, And when once I have seen it, I'd see it again. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. The men of the country may jeer and may jibe That I rank with the penniless, beggarly tribe, But though few are my cattle, I'll still find a way For a drop in my bottle till I'm under the clay. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. There's a grumpy old fellow, as proud as a king, Whose lambs will be dying by scores in the spring, Drinks 3 bottles a year, most sober of men, But dies a poor sinner like Clan MacLean. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. When I'm at the market with a dozen like me, Of proper good fellows that love barley brie, I sit round the table and drink without fear, For my good wife says only, God bless you, my dear. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. Though I'm poor, what of that? I can live and not steal, Though pinched at a time by the high price of meal. There's good luck with God, and He gives without measure, And while He gives health, I can pay for my pleasure. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. Very true that my drink makes my money go quicker, Yet I'll not take a vow to dispense with good liquor. In my own liquid way I'd be great among men, Now you know what to think of good Clan MacLean. My bonny dark maid, my precious, my pretty, I'll sing in your praise a light-hearted ditty. Fair daughter, whom none had the sense yet to marry, And I'll tell you the cause why their love did miscarry, My bonny dark maid. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Inish Choinish by Professor John Stuart Blackie. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. Nay, spur not so. He wastes no time who tarries a moment here To spell the old grey stones, Where high-renowned MacLeans and stout Macquaries Rehearse their glories and preserve their bones. Here think thee back 1,000 years or more, And ask how tonsured monks were mighty then From grey Iona's granite-girdled shore, To tame the souls of rude, rough-hearted men. No feeble race were they who chose to dwell In the green refuge of this wave-lashed nook, But strong in love and the all-conquering spell Of death-defying cross and peaceful crook, And armed with law divine more strong than steel, To bend the staff and make the proud man kneel. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Nine Noted Chiefs of MacLean by Professor John Stuart Blackie. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. When the King of Norway came our Alexander's crown to claim At Largs with pomp and pride there, Gil MacLean seized the villain, and drowned him in the Clyde there. Red Hector slew, I tell you true, the Laird of Drum and all his crew, at Harlaw on the heather there. But there the slain the slayer slew, and both lay dead together there. At Flodden Field stout Hector stood, with all the best of Scottish blood, till swooping ruin found him there. And man for man his faithful clan were heaped in death around him there. Big Lachlan from his rocky hold right wisely ruled his clansmen bold that owned the stout command there, but stained with gore green Islay shore, cut down by traitor hand there. At Inverlochy on the foes Sir Lachlan rained a shower of blows, a true and loyal knight there, while false Argyle, removed a mile, looked on and then took flight there. Sir Hector Roy, the stout MacLean, fought 1 to 10, but all in vain, his broad claymore unsheathing, himself lay dead mid heaps of slain for Charles at Inverkeithing. O good Sir John, hadst thou been wise to read the times with prophet eyes, nor prop the falling Stuart then, the false Argyle with all his wile had not set foot in Duard then. On dark Culloden's bloody heath Drimnan's claymore leaped from its sheath, Prince Charlie to deliver there, but vain the fight, in pitchy night his star went down forever there. When Lachlan's soul to Ifrin sped, the fiends below rejoiced, and said, if Satan should resign here, this bad MacLean in hell shall reign, and drink red blood for wine here. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. War Song of Lachlan, High Chief of MacLean. Translated from the Gaelic by Sir Walter Scott. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. A weary month has wandered o'er since last we parted on the shore. Heaven, that I saw thee, love, once more, safe on that shore again. 'Twas valiant Lachlan gave the word, Lachlan of many a galley lord. He called his kindred bands on board, and launched them on the main. Clan Gillian is to ocean gone, Clan Gillian fierce in foray known, rejoicing in the glory won in many a bloody broil. For wide is heard the thundering fray, the rout, the ruin, the dismay, when from the twilight glens away Clan Gillian drives the spoil. Woe to the hills that shall rebound our bannered bagpipes' maddening sound, Clan Gillian's onset echoing round shall shake their inmost cell. Woe to the bark whose crew shall gaze where Lachlan's silken streamer plays, the fools might face the lightning's blaze as wisely and as well. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Cornac on Sir Lachlan, Chief of MacLean. Translated from the Gaelic by Sir Walter Scott. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Which of all the Senechies can trace thy line from the root up to paradise, but MacVurry, the son of Fergus? No sooner had thine ancient stately tree taken firm hold in Albion, than one of thy forefathers fell at Harlaw. 'Twas then we lost a chief of deathless name. 'Tis no base weed, no planted tree, nor a seedling of last autumn, nor a sapling planted at Beltane. Wide, wide around were spread its lofty branches, but the topmost bough is lowly laid. Thou hast forsaken us before Sawain. Thy dwelling is the winter house. Loud, sad, sad and mighty is thy death song. O courteous champion of Montrose! O stately warrior of the Celtic Isles! Thou shalt buckle thy harness on no more. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Lady of Duard's Vengeance by Charles Mackay. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Weird woman that dwellest on lofty Ben More, give ear to my sorrow, and aid I implore. A lady has come from the green sunny bowers of a far southern clime to the mountains of ours, a light in her eyes, but deceit in her heart, and she lingers and lingers and will not depart. Through darkness and danger, mid tempest and rain, she has sailed to our shores from the vineyards of Spain, forsaking her country, her kindred, her home, abroad through our cold western islands to roam, to find a young lover as fair to her sight as a vision she saw in the slumbers of night. And hither by stars inauspicious conveyed, she has come, in her gems and her beauty arrayed, with a tongue full of sweetness, a heart insincere, and fixed her bright eyes on the chief of MacLean, to toy with his heart and bewilder his brain. And I, who was once the delight of his soul, ere she like a blight on my happiness stole, now wander through Duard, neglected and lorn, of a stranger the scoff, of my maidens the scorn, with a grief in my bosom that gnaws at the core, and a fire in my brain that will burn evermore. Unless thou wilt aid me with charm and with spell to gain back the heart I have cherished so well, and rid me of her who with art the most vile has poisoned my peace with her glozing and guile. I hate her with hatred intense as despair, yet murder's a guilt that my soul cannot bear. Be calm, craven spirit, on me be the guilt. No poison shall rack her, no blood shall be spilt, till my hair has turned gray and my blood has grown thin. I have dwelt on Ben More with the spirits of sin, and have learned by their aid without weapons to kill, and can blast by a look, and destroy by my will. With a good ship the Florida far on the seas, I'd whirl her and toss her like chaff on the breeze, and far on some cliff where the storms ever roar, and aid could not reach them, I'd drive them ashore, and the wanton I'd seize by her long raven locks, and drag her to death at the foot of the rocks. But safe from all danger of winds and of tides, in calm Tobermory at anchor she rides. But peril may come mid security deep, and vengeance may wake when the world is asleep, and strong though her timbers, her haven secure, the hand of revenge, though unseen, shall be sure. Serene was the night, and unruffled the bay, not a breath stirred the deep where the Florida lay. Her broad azure pendant hung breezeless on high, and her thin taper masts pointed clear to the sky. And the moonlight that fell on the breast of the deep appeared like the charm that had lulled it to sleep. The cabin boy dreamed of the vineyards of Spain, or roamed with a maiden at sunset again. The sailor in fancy was dancing afar in his own native land to his graceful guitar, or blessed with a household in sleep was restored to the children he loved and the wife he adored. The fair Spanish lady in visions was blessed. She dreamed that escaped from the isles of the west, her young Highland chief had consented to roam to her far Andalusia in search of a home, that together they dwelt in her own sunny clime, where life was no effort and love was not crime. None dreamed of the danger that round them might lurk, but in darkness and silence a spell was at work. Concealed in the waters, at poop and at prow, the agents of evil were busy below, and noiseless their labor, but certain their stroke, through her strong carpered hull and her timbers of oak. And long ere the morning a loud sudden shriek was heard o'er the bay, "Sprung a leak! Sprung a leak!" Oh, then there was gathering in tumult and fear, and a blanching of cheeks as the peril grew near, a screaming of women, a shouting of men, and a rushing and trampling again and again. No time for leave taking, no leisure to weep. In rolled the fierce waters, and down to the deep, down, down 50 fathoms, with captain and crew, the Florida sank, with the haven in view. Down, down to the bottom, escaping but one, to tell the sad tale of the deed that was done. And he, as he battled for life with the tide, beheld the fair lady of Spain by his side, and a lank skinny hand that came up through the spray, and twined in her tresses as floating she lay. and heard the loud laughter of fiends in the air as she sank mid the waves with a shriek of despair. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Burial of Sir Lachlan More MacLean by Thomas Patterson. Slowly from the field of slaughter do they bring Sir Lachlan More, slowly o'er the wearied moorland from the damp and deadly shore, slowly and in bitter sorrow through a rough and rugged way, with the yellow beams upon it of the sickly setting day. Ah, how lowly lies the leader, see how pale his face is now! Never in the hall or highway, never on the mountain brow, shall his step be laid majestic, shall his stately form be seen, shall his voice inspire the council or the fight his manly mien. Never shall his clan behind him gather in the joy of fight, never draw their cold blue weapons, hard and deadly, glancing bright. Poorly now's the chief attended, rudely now the heroes led, yet he wakes not from the slumber of yon red and mossy bed, for the sad stamps on his feature which Dubshee's hard arrow bore, on the moor Clan Gillian reddened with their brave and boiling gore. Only two are with the driver on a rolling, rocking car, stretched whereon the dead man's carried from the fiery field of war. Two that walk in silent sorrow, ladies of his kindred are, mourning to the field of slaughter, come to seek him from afar. As they drive him slowly onward o'er the bad and broken way, his head with all its matted tresses nodded where he lifeless lay. Then the driver laughed who saw him large and massy lie along, senseless, soulless, him so lately foremost in the martial throng, laughed, and quicker drove him onward yet again to see the head nodding without will or reason, with its light of manhood fled, nodding at the boor who jeered him with that mean malicious scorn, nursed in secret by the envy and the vulgar spirit born. Then the ladies hastened forward, not a word the younger said, while the tears rained down in anguish on the wan face of the dead. But the elder damsel answered, "Laugh'st thou at my fallen chief? May thy own vile carcass, caitiff, fill thy mother's heart with grief." Out she drew the chieftain's dagger, as she hurled this angry cry at the boor who gloomed before her with his dull and threatening eye. And she struck him down and left him stretched beneath the sunbeams there, like a wild fowl by the falcon swept from out the fields of air. Then alone their dead they carried, while one nursed the manly brow, nursed it on her bosom gently like a holy, heavenly vow. And one, tenderly she drove him to the sad and solemn ground, where the hero's dust reposes with the mouldering ashes round. Soft and slowly there we leave them. Chieftain, may thine ashes rest peaceful as the voice of prayer from a calm, untroubled breast. Long as sound the breezes o'er them, sound the voice of psalms beside, and spread Christ's peace-speaking gospel from thy green sod far and wide. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Battle of Knockbreek. Original by Phillips of Ambercloss. Translated by Unknown. Read for LibriVox by DrPGould. Meantime Lochbuie from the stormy isle of warlike Mull advanced to join Dundee. 300 brave MacLeans composed his train, a generous loyal clan whose faithful blood untainted filled his veins. Quick he marched along the banks of Spey in silence of the night, the royal camp unknown, a stranger he, and unacquainted with the gloomy shade. Upon a hostile troop of Belgic horse, the advanced guard, whom he believed his friends, erroneous fell. "Stop!" the hoarse sentry bawled in horrid Dutch, and straight upon them fired. The rest alarmed, a thundering peal of shot discharged, and tore the air with fire and smoke. The brave MacLeans their compliment returned, and scattered flaming death among the foe.
Then forming in a wedge their thickest lines they pierced, and through the furious squadron broke with sword in hand. Nor halted they until they gained a neighboring eminence, a rock, whose frowning top amid the clouds concealed, showed all its battered sides with rugged stones and fragments huge perplexed, and took its name from blood which their impervious surface stained. Where, as with ramparts fenced, secure they lodged superior to the foe. Thither in haste, and with collected strength of different lands, Germans, Dutch, English, rebel Scots, and Danes, the adverse troop pursue. Oft did they aim with fire and sword to storm the rugged camp, but all in vain. With spears and darts, and stones and rocks, which tumbling down with hideous din o'erwhelmed both horse and man, they headlong drove the insulting foe, who with their mangled limbs and brains and bloods the ragged flints besmeared. Their leader, daring, haughty, fierce, and proud, in war delighted, and with keenest rage his foe pursued. Great Britain's southern shore his boasted clime, the English horse and rough Batavian troops his stern command obeyed. His shining neck a golden collar graced, and from his shoulder hung a scarlet sash or a purple robe, conspicuous far with golden lace and rich embroidery shone. Enraged to see his baffled troops repelled, and scattered mongst the rocks their mangled limbs, he gnashed his teeth, and mad with fury bawled, "Come down, ye thieves, you barbarous crew, descend, and on the equal plain your courage prove, nor lurk behind those rocks if ye be men." Then, as if impelled by rage of all delay, impatient, furious, he commands his troops the precipice to gain and drive them down, or leave their battered carcasses a prey to wolves and dogs, and fearless leads them on. But, undismayed, the brave MacLeans beheld the audacious foe, and with firm hearts resolved by manly deeds to answer boasting vain. And, quick as thought to his unerring eye, his thundering piece a warrior bold applied, whence as from fate a whizzing bullet flew, with fire and sulphur winged, and at the mouth of the proud boaster entering, pierced his lungs with rapid force, and at his back its passage made. Down to the earth he fell, and rolling round his languid eyes, his soul, forth issuing with his blood, dissolved in air. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. MacLean's Welcome to Prince Charlie, author unknown. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Come o'er the stream, Charlie, dear Charlie, brave Charlie, come o'er the stream, Charlie, and dine with MacLean. And though you be weary, we'll make your heart cheery, and welcome our Charlie and his loyal train. We'll bring down the track deer, we'll bring down the black steer, the lamb from the bracken, the doe from the glen. The salt sea we'll harry, and bring to our Charlie the cream from the brothy and curd from the pen. Come o'er the stream, Charlie, dear Charlie, brave Charlie, come o'er the stream, Charlie, and dine with MacLean. And though you be weary, we'll make your heart cheery, and welcome our Charlie and his loyal train. And yon shall drink freely the dews of Glen Shirley, the stream is the starlight when kings do not ken, and deep be your mead of the wine that is red, to drink to your sire and his friend the MacLean. Come o'er the stream, Charlie, dear Charlie, brave Charlie, come o'er the stream, Charlie, and dine with MacLean. And though you be weary, we'll make your heart cheery, and welcome our Charlie and his loyal train. O'er heath bells shall trace you the maids to embrace you, and deck your blue bonnet with flowers of the brae, and the loveliest Mary in all Glen Macquarie shall lie in your bosom till break of the day. Come o'er the stream, Charlie, dear Charlie, brave Charlie, come o'er the stream, Charlie, and dine with MacLean. And though you be weary, we'll make your heart cheery, and welcome our Charlie and his loyal train. If aught will invite you, or more will delight you, 'tis ready, a troop of our bold Highland men shall range on the heather with bonnet and feather, strong arms and broad claymores 310. Come o'er the stream, Charlie, dear Charlie, brave Charlie, come o'er the stream, Charlie, and dine with MacLean. And though you be weary, we'll make your heart cheery, and welcome our Charlie and his loyal train. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Gathering of the Clan by Mary Ross. DrPGould. Banners are waving o'er Morvern's dark heath, Claymores are flashing from many a sheath. Hark! 'Tis the gathering! On, onward they cry, Far flies the signal, to conquer or die. Then follow thee, follow, a boat to the sea, Thy prince in Glen Moidart is waiting for thee, Where war pipes are sounding and banners are free, MacLean and his clansmen the foremost you'll see. Wildly the war cry has startled yon stag, And wakened the echoes of Gillian's lone crag. Up hill and down glen each brave mountaineer Has belted his plaid and mounted his spear. Then follow thee, follow, a boat to the sea, Thy prince in Glen Moidart is waiting for thee, Where war pipes are sounding and banners are free, MacLean and his clansmen the foremost you'll see. The signal is heard from mountain to shore, They rush like the flood over dark Corryvore. The war note is sounding loud, wildly, and high, Louder they shout, On, to conquer or die. Then follow thee, follow, a boat to the sea, Thy prince in Glen Moidart is waiting for thee, Where war pipes are sounding and banners are free, MacLean and his clansmen the foremost you'll see. The heath bell at morn so proudly ye trod, Son of the mountain, now covers thy sod, Wrapped in your plaid mid the bravest ye lie, The words as ye fell, still to conquer or die. Then follow thee, follow, a boat to the sea, Thy prince in Glen Moidart is waiting for thee, Where war pipes are sounding and banners are free, MacLean and his clansmen the foremost you'll see. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Isle of Inishchoinich by Dr. Samuel Johnson. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Scarce spied amidst the West Sea foam, Yet once religion's chosen home, Appears the isle whose savage race By Kenneth's voice was won to grace. O'er glassy tides I thither flew, The wonders of the spot to view. In lonely cottage great MacLean Held his high ancestral reign With daughters fair, whom love might deem The naiads of the ocean stream. Yet not in chilly cavern rude were they, Like Danube's lawless, but all that charms a polished age, The tuneful lyre, the learned page, Combined to beautify and bless That life of ease and loneliness. Now dawned the day whose holy light Puts human hopes and cares to flight, Nor mid the hoarse waves' circling swell Did worship here forget to dwell. What, though beneath a woman's hand The sacred volume's leaves expand, No need of priestly sanction there, The sinless heart makes holy prayer. Then wherefore further seek to rove, While all is here our hearts approve, Repose, security, and love. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. A Lay of Clan MacLean, author unknown. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Prologue. With pen and ink and pen wiper, A clerk would fain indite a song. He would he were a Highland piper, To blow a bagpipe loud and long. About the Clan MacLean of Duart, The Archies, Lachlan's, Hughes, and Johns, As good a clan as royal Stuart, And better than the German Vaughans. The clerk himself is come of Japhet, Though neither Mac nor Vaughan he be. In ancestry there's naught to laugh at, Who mocks, no grandfather had he. The men who venerate their fathers Desire their sons should do the same. 'Tis thus a race its essence gathers, 'Tis thus ennobled is a name. Song. The isles that stud the stormy waters Of Caledonia's rugged strands Send warlike sons and gentle daughters To brace the blood of tamer lands. They leave the islands of the far west, The cradle of the iron gale, For scanty is the Highland harvest, Too many mouths, too little kale. No purple grapes, but oats and barley Give nerve and blood to the MacLeans, Yet loyal blood that flowed for Charlie Still circles in their children's veins. Their fathers supped oatmeal and whiskey, Their beds were made of fragrant heath, Their heads were cool, their legs were frisky, their hearts like fires the plaids beneath. Their limbs were free in nature's leather, as Greeks rejoice their gods to mould. The Phrygian cap with eagle's feather adorned the head, and braved the cold. The kilt, the tunic of the Roman, the plaid, the drapery of the Greek, when were such sons of mortal woman, whose very dress had tongues to speak? Heroic men in vain one preaches, the prosy race of moderns find. 'Tis decenter to wear the breeches, a tile and coat with tails behind. But fancy Staffa's glorious columns draped with the creepers of Sula, a Highlander in what d'ye call'ems, the things his fathers never knew. But never mind, you'll always find him as warm in heart, as leal in bone. He graced the kilt he leaves behind him, he honors what he now puts on. They leave the land of sombre beauty, of mountains, rock, and sandy shore, but full of love, of faith, and duty, where'er they go they love it more. Dear land, though o'er thy hills the heaven may lack Morea's lustrous skies, to thee a freedom has been given, which in yon dazzling climate dies. As these gray hills of rock and heather draw down the clouds in misty rain, so draw them by a mystic tether, the exiled Highland heart again. Their memory warms at old tradition of Mull and Call and dark Lismore, old Fingal deeds, Columba's mission, the Duart towns, and Arrow shore. How proud are they of clannish tartan, how dear to them the bonnet blue! The Gael's descendants set their heart on the colors of their fathers true. In later as in older story of battlefield the Clan MacLean has borne a greater share of glory than tamer races of the plain. Schooled as of old the warrior Spartan to live and die for home and fame, with steel and blood these men in tartan on honor's shield have graved a name. In war MacLean is brave in battle, in peace a credit to his clan. In office, trade, or feeding cattle, in love or friendship, he's your man. Then blow the pibroch o'er the waters, we'll dance a reel with might and main. Long live the name, the sons and daughters, at home, abroad, of Clan MacLean. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Courtship of Hector MacLean by William Allen. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Part 1. The night clouds are falling, the curlew is calling, Maid of Dunolly, I come unto thee. The grey mists are sleeping on Cruachan Ben, the red deer are keeping their watch in the glen. Light of my darkness, come, come unto me. Come, gentle spirit, we part, and forever. Come, my lone star, see, my skiff's in the bay. Sunbeam of morning, alas, we must sever. Maid of Dunolly, we part, and for aye. The past I shall cherish, my love cannot perish. Maid of Dunolly, oh, why did we love? The wrath of thy father is winter's cold breath. Around me fast gather weird visions of death. Soul of my dreamings, thy home is above. Come, drooping floweret, I've dared thy brave kinsman. Come, lonely dove, to thy warrior true. Shadow of heaven and pride of thy clansmen, my heart goes to thee in my lingering adieu. Ere died the echoes of the lay, an oar song swept across the bay. Ere turned the youth his skiff to reach, swift footsteps ran along the beach. Before him came MacDougall's dread, returning from an island raid. Behind him came MacDougall's wild, aroused to guard their chieftain's child. Their startling yells of rage were flung, and back from grey Dunolly rung the oarsmen heard the well-known cry, and fiercer far pealed their reply. Their stalwart arms out sternward went, their lithe backs forward lowly bent, to simultaneous motion prone, their oars arose and fell as one. Impelled with danger's vigour new, swift o'er the bay each galley flew, like arrows shot from full-drawn bows. On sped the billow-cleaving prows, till driven on the shingle nigh, the oaken keels arose on high. With sudden bound unto the shore each clansman leapt with drawn claymore. Bare-armed, unbonneted, they ran to join the members of their clan, ranged round a stalwart youth who stood bold-fronted mid the savage brood. At every point the thirsty brands around him flashed in angry hands. With eagle eye and undismayed the stranger drew his trusty blade, and tighter grasped his studded shield, and firmer stood upon the field, as watchful as a wolf at bay. His lightning eye mid them survey, nor quailed nor flinched, though well he saw the gathering horde still closer draw. No coward heart within him beat, nor sought he safety in retreat. Unequal though the contest seemed, defiance on his features gleamed. One hurried glance he flung above, where dwelt the maiden of his love. A pale face from a window peered, a sigh upon the wind careered, a whisper trembled in the air, as if an angel breathed a prayer. Undaunted all, and scorning death, he faced his foes and held his breath. With back against King Fingal's rock, he boldly met their onset shock, and flung his haughty looks of scorn upon MacDougall, chief of Lorn. II. O Isles of the West, lovely Isles of the West, as emeralds set in the blue ocean's breast, the birthplace of clansmen war nurtured and brave, the home where the tempest king rides on the wave, where thunders roll on in their terrible might, and keen lightnings dance on each peak with delight, where morning's dawn raids o'er the mountain crests run, and gloaming descends as a sigh from the sun, where pale ghosts career on the mist-shrouded hills, and heard are their wails in the songs of the rills, where beauty is shrined in each lone grassy vale, and wee flow'rets laugh to the voice of the gale, where unfettered peace as a heaven presides, and nature's sweet loveliness ever abides, where maidens and youths round their dim cottage fires exultingly tell of the deeds of their sires, or sing with emotion the grand battle lays of heroes who fought in the far-away days, for king and for chieftain, for honor and love, for aught that would valor or dignity prove. O Isles of the West, ever bosomed in song, my Highland harp whispers, the sound I'll prolong. Speak on, my dear harp, list, it trembles again, its theme the MacDougall and dauntless MacLean. The sun rays had fled from the mountains of Lorn, and kissed the cloud peaks looming jagged and riven, that westward were trailing as wanderers forlorn upon the broad heaths of the night-tinted heaven. Peace clothed the green valleys, the hills, and the isles. The strange sounds of silence seem wondrously clear, unbroken, save when, with his chase-laden spoils, arose the loud shout of a brave mountaineer, which woke the weird echoes of corrie and cave, and startled the Lord of the Clouds in his dreams, who raised his proud head and defiantly gave his fierce challenge back in his shrill-sounding screams. The distant bell notes slowly rung from Lismore, and fluttered with joy o'er the fast-ebbing tide, which bore them with love unto Morven's far shore, where midst its blue mountains they whispered and died. Sweet o'er the dark waters the vesper hymn stole, in cadences kissed by the gloaming soft breath. Monks poured their orisons with joy-dwelling soul, and hied to their cells in the fullness of faith. Who knelt with the abbot, who joined in his prayer, whose voice in devotion fell soft as a sigh. MacDougall's fair daughter was worshipping there, MacDougall's fair daughter was heard in reply. Why lingered she thus as the sunrays depart? Dunley was far, and the dark sea her path. What recked she? She bore in her bosom a heart that feared not the swift-rushing tide in its wrath. A child of the forest, a child of the chase, accustomed to danger, to hardship inured, descended from chiefs of a warrior race, whose titles and acres were held by the sword. The blood of the valiant flowed pure in her veins. She loved to behold the brave clansmen in arms. The bright flashing steel and the pibroch's wild strains gave light to her dark eyes and grace to her charms. Though nurtured mid war's stirring clangor and din, her heart was a woman's in all which endears, the fountain of tenderness welling within. For children had smiles, for the dying had tears. Her dark flowing locks hung unfettered and free, and waved in the wind as a banner love-driven. Her brow gently kissed by the sun in his glee reflected the beauty of summer-fraught heaven. Her eyebrows as fringes of darkness arose, in soft glossy silkiness fading to naught, while 'neath their love shadows in tender repose her dreamy eyes rippled in soul light of thought, which brightly illumined her features and lent ineffable witchery to the sweet smiles oft throned on her lips with a gracefulness meant to beautify nature's pure innocent wiles. In symmetry faultless, in tartan arrayed, she moved as a sylph in her artless attire. When heard were the songs of Dunolly's fair maid, the clansmen wept great tears of grief, joy, or ire. The gray headed abbot stalked down to the shore, and blessed the young maiden, and bade her adieu. She launched her light skiff, waved her hand, seized the oar, then off with the tide for Dunolly she flew. III. Away and away, with the speed of the wind, each headland, each creek, and each cranny she knew. Lismore's verdant island was left far behind, and distant Dunolly loomed darkly in view. The tide rush of Etive she battled with might, 'twas vain, to the westward she swiftly was hurled. Strong eddies, wild sweeping, hissed hoarse with delight, as oft her frail skiff in their vortex was whirled. Undaunted and tireless she pulled at the oars, undaunted and fearless the breakers' deep song she heard, mid Carrara's wild treacherous shores. But watchful and wary she darted along. She saw with dismay that Dunolly she passed, she saw its dark tower swiftly gliding astern, as gloaming gave place to night's darkness at last. The landmarks erst known she could dimly discern, the lone herald star of the evening appeared in pale silvern modesty's beauty serene, while down in the east o'er the cloud edges peered the halo that ushered night's full beaming queen. Then leapt every star from its holy repose as choristers sweet in the heavens above. Their bright joyous anthems of glory arose in soft trembling beauty, in homage of love. On, on, and still on to the westward she sped, and cold dawning fear tilled her bosom with awe, that awe which unnerves us and fills us with dread, and makes us poor slaves to its pitiless law. The night mist descended from lofty Ben More, and rolled as a cloud on the breast of the deep. Weird sounds rose anon, now behind, now before, and floating seagulls wildly screamed in their sleep. The conflict of currents hissed loud to the skies, and heightened the waves that in anger arose around her frail skiff. Their wan, death gleaming eyes oft peered at the maiden, and laughed at her woes. The terror of death filled her soul with despair, she trembled and wept as a motherless child. She gazed to the heavens, she shrieked a heart prayer in accents of agony fearfully wild. Hark, hark, o'er the deep came a sound. Could it be her prayer was answered, that succor was nigh? The harsh creak of oars on the mist laden sea came nearer, came clearer, and filled her with joy. A voice from the darkness was heard. She replied. The moments seemed hours that would ne'er have an end. She marked through the mist a boat's faint shadow glide, and heard the halloo of a fast nearing friend. Invisible hands flung unerring a rope, its swift gliding folds seemed the answer she craved. 'Twas clutched with the frenzy of fast dying hope, and consciousness fled as the maiden was saved. MacDougall's grim chieftain was restless this night. He stood on his ramparts, he watched and he mourned. His henchmen and clansmen with fleet-footed might had sought her afar, but despairing returned. They sought her in chamber, they sought her in cot, they searched Etive shore, they scoured valley and heath, their slogan pealed far, but an answer came not, and filled was each breast with forebodings of death. MacDougall's grim chieftain stalked through his lone halls, despair's moody silence o'ershadowed his face. The voice of the night wind in ominous calls seemed chanting a dirge for the doom of his race. He started, he wept, then he laughed, then he scowled, then sullenly motionless stood on the floor, and quivered with terror as dismally howled the staghound that kept his night watch at the door. Mysterious footsteps he heard as they moved, strange beings appeared, but to vanish again. Ah, little he knew that the daughter he loved was safe in the halls of his foe, the MacLean. IV. There was a time, a long, long time ago, when Duard's halls resounded to the flow of minstrel harmony, of dance and song,
of mirth and glee from clansmen old and young. When Duard's chief could muster at his word 1,000 doughty champions of the sword, 1,000 plaided men whose only faith was love the chief and fear no foe or death. No other aspirations filled them then, save to be reckoned as heroic men. Their hearts were fraught with burning warlike zeal, their frames were iron, and their sinews steel. On simple fare as hardy men they grew, nor luxury's effeminacy knew. Their cots and fields were theirs, rude comfort reigned. They felt not want, and healthful years maintained. They loved their chief for honor and for name, and freely shed their blood to guard his fame. The chief loved them with patriarchal care, knew all their sorrows, heard each plaint or prayer. And as a father mid his children dear, he lived beloved and honored without fear. Untainted thus, with no ambition's pride, in nature's happiness they lived and died. See Duard now, its shapeless ruins gloom in the sad grandeur of a shivered tomb. Time's silent chisels have fell havoc spread, a wreck is here, cold, desolate, and dead. The moaning sea around the headland sweeps, and o'er the rocks in fretful surges leaps, or wanders mournfully around the bay, where oft the black prowed oaken galleys lay. The eerie wind within the ruin raves, and shrilly whistles o'er the warriors' graves. The grass is bent 'neath the uncertain blast, as nature's mourners for a glorious past. No sound is heard, no wandering footstep seen. Decay's weird silence lords it o'er the scene. The night bats dart from out the chinky walls, and ghostly owlets own the roofless halls. The gloomy spirits of a valiant race seem stalking ever round the lonely place, or 'neath the full moon's wan, unearthly light, seem mustering us of yore for raid or fight. Unto the mournful pibroch of the wind that dies, and leaves a deeper hush behind. 'Twas here the Hector of my tale drew his first breath, and poured his infant wail. Here his young lips drew with a lover's zest his future valor from his mother's breast. Here his young eyes beheld with fond delight the shining, steely panoply of fight. His chubby hands oft vigorously essayed to lift with shouts the old paternal blade. A dirk and shield were his infantile toys, their rattling din the source of childish joys. The ancient dame, endowed with second sight, foretold his future as a chief of might. The hoary bards would on him wondering gaze, and croon to him their stirring battle lays. The smiling clansmen would with loving scan applaud the annex that bespoke the man, and gathering round their fair-haired future lord, they taught him early how to wield a sword, and bend a bow with steady hand and eye, until the shafts would all unerring fly. To scale the rugged heights, devoid of fear, and track with wary steps the watchful deer. To pull an oar, or tend a shortened sail, when burst the fury of a sudden gale. Beneath tuition such as this he grew, skilled in the various arts that clansmen knew, till daring Hector stood unmatched at length for feats of arms, agility, and strength. The wolf that roamed the shores of Gallaudet he tracked unto his lair and singly slew. He fought the eagle on the giddy crest, and conquering bore the eaglets from their nest. The prowling foe on sudden nightly raid was vanquished oft beneath his foremost blade. In skirmishes upon the mainland shore his skilful prowess oft the victory bore. His doughty deeds were whispered far and wide, and bards and maidens sang of them with pride, till, mid the isles, his warlike name was spread, and foemen feared the men by Hector led. Proud was the father of his chief-like boy, the gentle mother's only hope and joy. His well-knit frame of perfect manly mold at once the leader and the warrior told. A calm determination lit his face, and gave his mien an awe-commanding grace. In judgment cool, in wary caution skilled, his looks and gestures confidence instilled. His eye in peace beamed with a kindly glow, but fiercely flashed when told a tale of woe. The heart that beat within his tartaned breast was swift to help the weak or the oppressed. Untouched as yet by love's absorbing flame, it felt not aught save the parental claim. As mid his clansmen's homes he freely roved, the maidens gazed, and as they gazed they loved. Thus Hector lived, and spent his youthful years, a lordly prince among his mountaineers.
By all who knew him loved, adored, revered, by every foeman in encounter feared. Not so his hereditary foe, MacDougall's chief, who longed his hate to show. Incensed to hear of Hector's rising fame, his breast was filled with jealousy and shame. Long in the west, as Lorn's unconquered lord, he awed the chieftains by his cruel sword. In raid or foray, or in deeds of blood, his wild and lawless clan the foremost stood. Nor could he brook to know some chiefs had sued alliance with the clan he had subdued. To guard his power, which seemed upon the wane, his dark heart planned a conflict with MacLean. Part V. The full-browed moon leapt from her shrouds, leaving behind the darkening clouds, and flung o'er mountains, hills, and braes the softening splendor of her rays. O'er Cruachan Ben they nimbly crept, on dark Loch Awe they gently slept, and westward far she sent her smiles, till silver-bathed appeared the isles. The moon was up, then wide and far arose MacDougall's cry of war. From Etive shore, from sweet Bonnow, to Kilninver and gray Kintrow, it wildly pealed on Avich's side. Dalmally and Kilchurn replied, and gloomy Brander's echoes run, as speedy clansmen rushed along through tangled brake, o'er stretching heath, and poured their startling cry of death, which summoned from each distant cot the clansmen to the mustering spot. Ere reached the moon her half-way mark, from mountain side, from gorges dark, from heath, from hill, from every glen, rushed forth full armed stout plaided men, whose distant forms were oft revealed as flashed the moonbeams on each shield. Obedient to the call they flew, nor aught of toil or fear they knew, as singly some careened along, they lowly hummed a battle song, the distance lessening 'neath the lay which cheered them on their lonely way, till on Dunolly's tower they gazed, upon whose northern walls still blazed the beacons' fitful, lurid light, betokening danger, foes, or fight. Around the walls were gathered then 200 of MacDougall's men, wild, unkempt, shaggy warriors grim, broad-chested, strong in arm and limb, from youth to ceaseless warfare trained, a terror far their names remained. Before their chief in armed array, the horde stood ready for the fray. "Swift! To the galleys, swift!" he cried. "We must away ere falls the tide." 10 oaken, broad-beamed galleys lay, rocked with the tide, in Oban's bay. Now from their moorings soon they danced, as oars upon the waters glanced, and 'neath their chieftain's eye and word the clansmen nimbly sprang on board. 4 brawny arms seized every oar, and soon the fast receding shore was left behind, and fainter grew as past Carrera's isle they flew. MacDougall led, the course was west. In whispers low his clansmen guessed that ere the morning sun arose their swords would smite some island foes. As huntsmen steal with caution near the browsing unsuspecting deer, as wildcats crouch and trailing creep before they make their deadly leap, as eagles circle in the sky ere on their prey they downward fly, so stealthily the waters o'er MacDougall neared the hazy shore, where Duart's keep, hushed in repose, in frowning grandeur looming rose. Calm, standing on his galley's prow, with anxious glass and cloudy brow, the chieftain led the dubious way, and sought the sheltered western bay, whose shelving shore gave footing meet for landing or for safe retreat. Though steering in the hazy band which hugged the confines of the land, he cleared the rocks that girt the shores, and Duart passed with muffled oars. Ah! wot he not the warder there, skilled in the night sounds of the air, had heard with ready, well-trained ear, or echoes softly stealing near, which all too measured, faint, and slow, betokened some advancing foe. Quick from the ramparts, quick he sped, and roused young Hector from his bed. "Up, Hector, up! A foe is near, their galleys 'neath the walls appear. Arm, arm! They seek the bay, their coming brooks of no delay." Up from his couch bold Hector leapt, and o'er his startled countenance crept a smile of joy, which seemed to show his readiness to meet the foe. "Wake, Malcolm, our retainers all, who slumber in the banquet hall. Then speed thee on, ere dawns the day, to Auchincross and Torosay. Away, away! Rouse every man who owes allegiance to our clan. With lightning footsteps tireless go, we must and shall repel this foe." Devoid of bonnet, hose, or plaid, he snatched his shield and glittering blade. with eye that flashed red battle fire, and step that told of rising ire. With lips compressed till void of blood, he sought the hall where ready stood scarce 30 stalwart clansmen leal, whose hearts and arms were like their steel. No sound, no word! Men, follow me! A foe comes on us from the sea. The lark pipes now its morning strains. Come on! It rouses the MacLeans. VI. The morn was calm. Bright in the east, afar as a lone sentinel, the morning star glimmered its welcomes in the deep-hued blue. As o'er the high-banked clouds the monarch threw his sceptre gleams of living, glowing gold, which vanquished night, and, space illuming, rolled in all the grandeur of a conqueror's might, whose path is victory, whose throne is light. The sullen shadows fled from mountain crests, and scowling sought the gorges in their breasts. Their lingering footsteps in the trailing mist, the airy smiles of light with fondness kissed, till grandly lone, with broad uncovered brows, as hoary worshippers each mountain rose. The wonder chorus of each stream was heard, and joyous trillings rose from every bird. Adown each glen the messengers of dawn danced merrily o'er forest, heath, and lawn. Swift o'er the heaving bosom of the sea they lightly flew with love-inspiring glee, and kissed the pale lips of the wavelets cold, till gleamed their foam flowers with the hues of gold. They wooed the haze that wrapped the slumbering isles, which gently rose beneath their chastening wiles. But ere it faded from the shores away, the sounds of battle burst in Duard's bay. MacDougall led the van, and well had steered into the bay, where on each side appeared brown, sea-washed rocks, whose unseen stretching arms broke the wild fury of the northern storms. Thus guarded from the ocean's wildest rage, it gave a safe and sheltered anchorage. His ready henchman with inverted spear probed the still depths, and found the shore was near. Then passed a whispered signal to each crew, to right and left the boats in order drew. With silent skill the oars were placed on board, and every clansman seized his shield and sword. In line abreast the galleys forward went, as from the stern they shoreward swift were sent. No word was uttered, and arose no sound, save when the hard keels creaked upon the ground. The chieftain first leapt nimbly on the sand, then followed fast his fierce and warlike band. The shore was still, no foe their landing barred, no Hector stood his island home to guard. No clansman rushed impetuous to the attack, to drive with might the wild invaders back. Where is Hector's deathful arm and blade? Where the men he oft to victory led? Alas! has valiant Hector's prowess waned? His foes unchallenged have a footing gained. Hark! hark! now pealed an agonizing yell, as in the sea MacDougall's henchman fell, pierced by an arrow that still quivering swayed within the wound its brazen point had made. Again! Again, with deadly aim, the messengers of death loud whizzing came from daring men unseen amid the haze, who crouched with Hector on the furzy braes. The feathered shafts from full drawn bows were sprung, and mid the startled foes their challenge flung. Brave warriors fell and writhed upon the sands, and wildly drew the barb with dying hands. Yea, vainly strove in agony to stay the pulsing stream of life which ebbed away. And sodden sands the hot blood greedy drank, staining the spot wherein it bubbling sank. Full well MacDougall knew without dismay that Hector and his men around him lay. Oblivious to the thickening arrowy storm, his looks betrayed no fear nor dire alarm. His ringing voice its chief-like orders gave, which cheered the heart of each desponding brave. Down, down, men! Down, until the fading haze flies from MacLean's safe ambush on the braes. Obedient all, they sank upon the shore, and o'er their heads their shields aloft they bore, against whose sloping fronts the arrows rung, and curving far into the ocean sprung. Then Hector knew, as clear that voice was borne, his foeman was MacDougall, chief of Lorn. Undaunted, undismayed, yea, rather glad to measure swords with one who ofttimes had in other years with devastation dire ravaged the lands and clansmen of his sire, outnumbered now, no rash onslaught he tried. His skilful tactics numbers well supplied, the dread confusion of attack on flanks, he early learned, and on the grassy banks he placed his little but determined force in two divisions mid the sheltering gorse, where, leading steeply downward to the bay, the rugged bouldered path between them lay, which thus commanding, with advantage great, their foemen's charge they anxiously did wait, nor waited long, for, as the sun arose, the haze evanished, and they saw their foes. Now as the dark tide wave on Etive shores rears its high crest and forward rolling roars, or as a pent-up spate with mighty force rushes upon its broad resistless course, so rose MacDougall's men and forward dashed, and brightly in the sun their weapons flashed. Swift-footed o'er the sands with yelling wrath they sought the only upward tending path. O'er rocks and stones disorderly they flew, and to the ridge in breathless hurry drew. MacDougall led them on, and upward pressed to reach the gap upon the grassy crest. Unswerving, unfatigued, he scaled the height, and gazed around, but saw no foe to fight. When suddenly from out each shady bush the valiant Hector and his men did rush, and loud arose their startling battle yell, as on the clamoring foe they fiercely fell, who staggering beheld the maddening grief, MacLeans between them and their warrior chief. Swords rung on swords, fire flashed from every blow, blood rushed in streams unto the sands below. Forward, and forward still MacDougall's rushed, the foremost fell, to be by kinsmen crushed upon the quivering corpses of the slain. They fighting came, and strove the ridge to gain, but as a compact phalanx stood their foes, who mercilessly showered their deadly blows, which crashing clave each high-raised shining shield, and smote the man beneath, who downward reeled. Still on they came in wild despairing might, unyielding stood the braves who held the height. Not all MacDougall's warlike numbers now could backward drive the 30 from that brow, who spoke not, quailed not, but resolved to give their dearest blood for liberty to live. Part 7. MacDougall's chieftain breast with anger burned, and swiftly on the foe he fiercely turned, but ere he could his sudden stroke bestow, a readier sword met the descending blow. 'Twas nimble Hector's, on whose features played a smile of triumph, as he quickly weighed the issues of a fight with Lorn's dread lord, who now had raised his yet untarnished sword, and backward drew a pace, then scowling glared upon the half-clad youth, who thus had dared to thwart his onset, and to turn aside the blade which had the royal Bruce defied. With sudden bound he on the stripling dashed, whose quicker weapon like a sunbeam flashed, and kissed with joy MacDougall's baffled steel, which now for once an equal match did feel. His groaning clansman roused his ireful heart, again on Hector did he fiercely dart, to be repelled with skilful blow or guard, and backward hurled upon the dewy sward. Ill could he brook defiance thus disclosed, and with the youth in deadly conflict closed. Now rung their blows upon each guardian shield, and rugged dents their angry might revealed. With equal skill the contest wildly raged, each knew a worthy foe he had engaged, though round them played the steely gleams of death. They thrust and struck with unabated breath, each lightning eye was fixed, each sparkling gleamed, each marked the point where an advantage seemed, and as each willing blade the opening sought, the sudden guard made sudden efforts naught. And victory, wavering 'tween such sons of fame, withheld the laurels that each well could claim, till youthful Hector's unabated strength proclaimed him victor in the fight at length. For fast MacDougall's furious ire decayed, and feeble blows his waning powers betrayed. Pale grew his face, his watchful eyes grew dim, less swift to guard he shook in every limb. Fast heaved his breast with ever lessening breath, and as he struck he reeled upon the heath. Defeat's dark demon raged within him now, its withering shade sat scowling on his brow, and fanned the feeble flame of hope in vain, which mocked the hero as his strength did wane. But Hector tireless still the conflict sought, and by a subtle cut MacDougall smote upon the sword arm, which all powerless hung. Then fell the blade which he in valor swung. Triumphant o'er his foe young Hector stood, nor sought he now to shed defenseless blood. "Yield thee, MacDougall, yield!" he hoarsely cried. "And who art thou, bold youth?" the chief replied. Hector MacLean of an illustrious line, yield thee, MacDougall, now thy life is mine. Behold thy clansmen unto thee succumb, to foil aggression, see our kinsmen come. Back to their galleys now thy men will be driven with the vengeance born of victory. Now rushed MacLeans along the grassy fields, and loudly struck their swords upon their shields. With wild impetuosity they sought the ridge whereon their dauntless kinsmen fought, nor checked their speed, but through the thin rank dashed, and on the foe with headlong fury crashed, who, baffled, fled across the sands, and sought safety on board their galleys still afloat. Out from the bay with terror's speed they drew, while in their midst thick showers of arrows flew. Eastward they sped with favoring tide and wind, and left their wounded and their chief behind, who midst a throng of savage Islemen stood unmoved, although they clamored for his blood. Now Hector spoke, and hushed was every voice: "Clansmen, MacDougall's fate must be my choice. No deed of wanton blood shall stain our name. Unsullied victory is our highest fame, whoe'er the foe, whate'er the battle cause. We triumph best when ruled by honor's laws. MacDougall's chief, thy life I now bestow. Back to Dunolly vanquished thou must go. Be thou the bearer of thy wounded men, and war no more unjustly 'gainst MacLean." The generous impulse stilled the angry band, who loved the virtue in their chief's command. With tender grasp the dying and the dead within the galley of the chief were laid. The wounded next fraternal care received, such love from foes their hearts had ne'er conceived. Now ready all, between the conquering clan MacDougall marched, a stern and gloomy man. And as he frowning slowly stepped on board, Hector, with princely grace, returned his sword. The proffered gift with haughty grasp he took, and thanked the donor with a threatening look. Then, as the blood-fraught galley seaward drew, he kissed the blade and waved its dark adieu. Undying hatred and revenge combined stood warders at the portals of his mind, and filled his heart with their demoniac fire, till the strange madness of their one desire reigned as the lord of his embittered life, and chained him slaved unto its fearful strife. The visions of his hate-disturbed brain were bloody spectres muttering, "MacLean!" In horror's dreams he saw a ghastly train, which, passing, whispered in his ear, "MacLean!" Lone on Dunolly's ramparts every day, his restless eyes were fixed on Duart's bay. No light of joy illumined his vengeful state. His life was now unfathomable hate. His lovely daughter's smiles had lost their charm, her soothing voice no more his heart could warm. Her constant fondnesses, her tears, her sighs, changed not the fierce gleam of his loveless eyes. MacDougall dreamt not that ere long her love would of his conqueror the conqueror prove. Decreed by heaven to meet her father's foe, they loved, was death, their death her father's woe. Part VIII. Bewitching, mild-eyed nature bright awoke when her misty veil of night had left her vernal bosom bare, and vanished in the sun-souled air. The lark had risen from its nest, the deer had sought the mountain crest, the sea had lost its nightly hue, the flowers had parted from their dew. The streamlets poured their wanton lays, the lambkins frisked upon the braes, the hinds had yoked their oaken ploughs, the rosy maids had milked the cows. The clouds in smiling beauty high sailed o'er the blue deeps of the sky, when from her sudden slumber yoke MacDougall's dark-haired daughter woke, and gazed around the chamber strange, while memory, with contracted rage, from dreamy retrospection sought the flickering truths of dawning thought, which ushered in with stern delight the horrors of the former night. The door was oped, and forward came a stately, gentle-featured dame, whose mother looks, and smiles, and voice were such as made the heart rejoice. The wondering maid she fond caressed, and clasped her to her joyous breast. She kissed her cheek, and kissed her brow, and welcomed her awakening now. "Daughter of warriors," she said, "I joy to find my care repaid." Dunolly's maid, half rising, sighed, and strove the welling tears to hide. Her eyes beamed through her love's surfeit, her voice was tremulously sweet. "Tell me, good mother, tell me true, to whom my life and thanks are due. Where am I now? Whose home is this? where dwells such Christian tenderness? Child of the waves, calm the unrest which lingers in thy anxious breast. Within our bosoms kindness reigns. Know we are friends, although MacLeans. My Hector was by Heaven decreed to save thee in thy hour of need. Start not, no harm to thee shall come, our clansmen shall convey thee home. Unto Dunolly's warrior lord his daughter shall be safe restored. The tearful maiden warmly kissed the chieftain mother, whom she blessed, then from her couch she lightly rose, at peace, though in the halls of those 'gainst whom her father erstwhile fought, on whom his wild revenge was sought. The morn's repast was quickly spread, and by the chieftain's lady led, the blushing maiden entered then the hall, where sat the chief, MacLean, who rose and gave with kindly smiles a lordly welcome to the isles. His hair, touched by time's silvern spell, adown his shoulders streaming fell. Of kindred hue his flowing beard in snowy furrowed waves appeared, and gave a charm unto his face which glowed with patriarchal grace. His eyes beamed with the soul repose which years of happiness disclose. His broad brow showed in sundry scars the valor emblems of his wars. His countenance was calm, benign, his smile was fatherly, divine. Of stalwart mien unbowed by years, his voice dispelled the maiden's fears, and as she heard his gentle tones she gazed with reverence upon the hoary chief, the island lord, who welcomed her unto his board. Ere seated round the table all, young Hector strode into the hall. One hurried bow he gave the maid, whose simultaneous glance betrayed the strange confusion, unexpressed, which bodes a maiden's feelings best, as on her Saviour she gazed. Love's tumult in her bosom blazed. Her meed of thanks refused to come, her eyes spoke now, her lips were dumb. She heard of Hector as of one bloodthirsty, cruel, scarce a man, who drove her father from the shore, in battle, nigh 2 months before. Her father's ire she deemed unjust, she saw in Hector one to trust. As Hector gazed upon the maid, his heart from every theme was swayed. His morning meal before him lay untouched, save in a listless way. A feast of fire o'erfilled him now, he knew not why, he felt not how. With truthful eye the chief divined the thoughts which racked the maiden's mind. And ere the simple meal was o'er, he sent his henchman to the shore to launch his boat, to bend the sail, to spread his banner to the gale. Sweet maid of Lorn, thou must away, though welcome here thou must not stay. Thy father's grief none can reveal, thou canst alone his anguish heal. Hector shall steer thee o'er the sea, and thy deliverer shall be. Farewell, sweet maid, our prayers are thine, may future joys around thee shine. Part IX. Right well MacLean had read her heart, the maid was anxious to depart. Her earnest gratitude of soul o'erpowering rushed beyond control, she sobbing bade them all adieu, and from the castle slowly drew. Young Hector lightsome led the way, where in the cove the galley lay. Then as a gallant courtier lord he placed the weeping maid on board, with skilful hands he plied the oars, and shot beyond the sheltering shores. Then hoisted up the broad brown sail, which filled unto the gentle gale. With favoring tide and favoring wind, gray Duard soon was left behind. Right merrily the boat sped on, and now they felt they were alone. They spoke, 'neath Hector's voice the maid the hidden mystery obeyed. Her world, erst fair, seemed fairer now. Her eyes beheld life's heaven below, and yielding to the conqueror's sway, they pledged eternal love that day. There is a music in the sea, an everlasting melody, an earnest chant of throbbing love, an echo of God's voice above, which gives unto our hearts the peace that bids our mutual loves increase. The little dancing waves rejoice to hear a maiden's love-fraught voice. They leap with frenzied mirth and glee as fall her vows of constancy, and fain their foamy crests would bless affection's sacred, primal kiss. They sang with joy when Hector brave his heart unto the maiden gave. They leapt with smiles on every crest to hear the maiden's vow expressed. With hand in hand, eye fixed on eye, the lovers kissed, and seemed to die 'neath the enraptured bliss divine, which springs when love's great fountains join. They neared Carrara's rocky shore, and round its northern headland bore. Swift for Dunolly's curving bay the galley bounded on its way. They saw upon the glistening sand one solitary warrior stand, who marked MacLean's dread banner fly upon the nodding mast on high. A whistle loud and shrill he blew, then from the cliffs MacDougall's flew, but ere they bent a single bow he spied his daughter on the prow. His hatred wilder, fiercer rose to mark her mid his deadly foes. Ere slid the galley on the sand, Hector beheld the threatening band, then lowered his sail and seized the oar, and slowly neared the dreaded shore. One word of love he gave the maid, whose gestures all their vengeance stayed. One look of hope beamed in her eye, which seemed to say, I all defy. Impatient now his child to free, the chieftain rushed into the sea. Before the keel had touched the sand, he grasped again his daughter's hand. Then in his frenzied, powerful arm he bore ashore her lovely form. Hector he saw, and darkly flung a scowl of hate from vengeance wrung. Bold, standing with an oar in hand before MacDougall's gathering band, he forced the unwilling boat astern, and sadly could the maid discern, amid the throng of clansmen wild with joy at finding thus their child. Remembering their hateful foe, they ceased their cries, and from each bow discharged a shower of darts, which fell harmless into the ocean swell. Far o'er the sea on southern tack, Hector with wistful eye looked back. A ceaseless longing o'er him stole, a darkness settled on his soul. The brightness of the morn had fled, and left him gloomy fears instead. The dawn rise of love's cheering ray had vanished all too soon away. The golden charm of hope's bright goal seemed fading from his saddened soul, and as he neared his native shore, one burning wish alone it bore. MacLean received with joy his son, as if a victory he had won. But Hector's heart was far away, his Duard's charms seemed to decay. Unrest's remorseless, cruel band had made him now an altered man. He sought the shores in darkest night, and ne'er returned till morning's light. They watched, but none the paths could name, or how he went, or whence he came. Ah! in his skiff he stole away across the Sound to Oban's bay, where by King Fingal's rugged stone MacDougall's maid be met alone, renewed their vows, repledged their faith, and kissed unswerving love till death. Part 10. Not all a daughter's love assuaged the hate which in MacDougall's bosom burned elate. Not all her soft expostulation sweet could the dread demon of revenge defeat. Unmoved and coldly calm he heard her prayer, for well he knew that Hector was her care. His trusty warder oft in midnight hour saw two mysterious forms beneath the tower, and oft of late had heard the sound of oars receding in darkness from the shores. To crush her love, to overcome his foe, his clansmen nightly watched the beach below. And when they heard her Hector's parting song, they swiftly stole by secret paths along, and rushed upon the youth, whose ready blade gleamed but an instant, and their onslaught stayed with sudden swoop, and straight delivered thrust. Three warriors fell before him in the dust. His light steel shield with cunning motion flashed, and on its front their blows descending crashed. Forward and forward still they pressed combined, struck but one blow, and wounded reeled behind. On every hand his sword appeared to see their covert cuts of dark ferocity, and instantly his ready guard essayed to foil each stroke that fell and notched his blade. Around him lay in groaning, helpless rows the prostrate forms of his remorseless foes. Some glared revenge, some cursed with dying breath, some strove to strike him in the throes of death. Some drew their dirks in anguish of despair, upraised their arms, and dying struck the air. Some tore in agony while life remained the clotted grass their own life blood had stained. Unwounded all, the youth unconquered stood, starred with the red drops of his foeman's blood. Fired with the madness springing from defeat, they blindly rushed and struck, but to retreat. Then forward stood amid the stiffening slang MacDougall's chief, who fiercely hissed, "MacLean!" Awed by their chief, the clansmen ceased to fight, and viewed the combat with intense delight. Revenge imbued his unaffected powers, his blows descended on the youth in showers, who stood unwavering, and the onset foiled; yea, smote the chief, who, wounded back, recoiled. Implacable and heedless of his wound, he rushed on Hector with a sudden bound, whose sword hand, swollen with conflict, filled the hilt, and now for once his weakening nature felt. While raged the strife, loud from the cliffs above a cry arose of agony and love. The watching clansmen gazed in wild dismay; down from each crag upon her headlong way MacDougall's daughter rushed with frantic cries, as Hector, wounded, fell, no more to rise. Swift through the silent horde she madly fled, oblivious to the dying and the dead, and stooped o'er Hector, who with fitful breath smiled still his love, and whispered low, "In death." Upon his dripping blade MacDougall leant, as o'er the youth his weeping daughter bent, who kissed his blood-stained lips, and wildly cried, "Cursed is the blade that pierced my Hector's side!" Then strangely gazed around, below, above, and falling died upon her only love. MacDougall gazed, nor thought his daughter dead, till stooping, gently raised her lovely head. Her cold, pale face too truly told the tale. Then burst a father's deep, heart-rending wail. Her eyes were closed, and silent now her tongue; bright on her pallid cheeks her last tears clung. The gentle hands, which oft had stroked his brow, clenched in their death grasp Hector's bosom now. The lips, which oft had sung in joyous mood, bore the red imprint of his trickling blood. With groans of terror, anguish, pain, and grief, the clansmen gathered round their stricken chief, who gazed in silence on his daughter's corse, while o'er her fell his tears of deep remorse. "Warriors," he cried, "behold my daughter dead! No more around us will her light be shed. Heaven wars with me. Oh, that I had but felt the depth of love which in her bosom dwelt! Here let the lovers lie, no more to part, in dust united, slumbering heart to heart. 'Neath Fingal's stone let them be gently laid, to rest forever in its storied shade. In coming years the warriors of our race will stand uncovered o'er their resting place, and breathe the tale of how MacDougall's maid loved unto death, and dying, love obeyed. The mighty stone, untouched by time, shall tell in voiceless whisperings, here Hector fell. With folded arms, in stern and lowering mood, MacDougall's chieftain meditative stood, while trembling, weeping clansmen dug the grave for all he loved, and for her Hector brave. No song of woe burst from the anguished crowd, when both were laid within their earthly shroud. The reddened sods they laid with care above, and all was hid from eyes of grief and love. The chief in dreamy silence strode away, unto unutterable woe a prey. Revenge and hate had from his bosom fled, he longed for love, but all of love was dead. No joy or peace within his halls remained, to hell's unrest he felt forever chained. While conscience, with red burning beak and claws, consumed the heart which broke its Maker's laws, e'en coming foes, led on by Scotland's king, stirred not his soul, nor could war's pleasure bring. His sword was sheathed, his path was toward the tomb, and Brander's battle pealed Donnelly's doom. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Glenara by Thomas Campbell. Read for LibriVox.org by Philip Gould. Oh, heard ye young pibroch sound sad in the gale, where a band cometh slowly with weeping and wail? 'Tis the chief of Glenara laments for his dear and her sire, and the people are called to her bier. Glenara came first with the mourners and shroud, her kinsmen they followed, but mourned not aloud. Their plaids all their bosoms were folded around, they marched all in silence, they looked on the round. In silence they reached over mountain and moor to a heath where the oak tree grew lonely and hoar. Now here let us place the gray stone of her cairn. Why speak ye no word? Said Glenara the stern. And tell me, I charge you, ye clan of my spouse, why fold ye your mantles, why cloud ye your brows? So spake the rude chieftain, no answer is made, but each mantle unfolding a dagger displayed. "I dreamt of my lady, I dreamt of her shroud," cried a voice from the kinsmen all wrathful and loud, "And empty that shroud and that coffin did seem. Glenara, Glenara, now read me my dream." Oh, pale grew the cheek of that chieftain, I ween, when the shroud was unclosed and no lady was seen. When a voice from the kinsmen spoke louder in scorn, 'Twas the youth who had loved the fair Ellen of Lorn. "I dreamt of my lady, I dreamt of her grief, I dreamt that her lord was a barbarous chief. On a rock of the ocean fair Ellen did seem. Glenara, Glenara, now read me my dream." In dust lo the traitor has knelt to the ground, And the desert revealed where his lady was found. From a rock of the ocean that beauty is born. Now joy to the house of fair Ellen of Lorn. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Lady of the Rock by Emily Pfeiffer. Read for LibriVox.org by DrPGould. Part 1. Rose red for the banner of love, and a blush for the cheek of the bride. To the valleys and hills of fair Loch Fyne the word went far and wide. They will marry this day, and marry to death, our flower of ladies, Elizabeth. On through the valleys and down from the hills, as the gathering cry of the clan had called them forth, through the moithering mist the lieges rode, or ran, to meet at the foot of the runic cross, and wring out the heart of their wrong and loss. And there met them here and there on the breeze, faint as a word of shame, the sound of a bell, but they knew not well as dubiously it came, or whether it chimed or whether it tolled, but they thought a knell had been more bold. And they questioned the wind as it rose and fell above and about Loch Fyne, the wind that lashed at the shrinking wave and harried the grove of pine. Is your cry as the cry of her love on the rack, or only Our Lady's coronach? But when they had come to the cross, and thence peered over the castle wall, and beheld the rout that was thronging the court, and the train that swarmed out of the hall, with the banners that flaunted beside the door, and the dog and the ship that the banners bore, and saw by the fiery beard and eyes, and the motions cold and dull, that the man who was leading the bartered bride was MacLean of Duart in Mull. Then they knew they had married to worse than death their flower of ladies, Elizabeth. Rose red is the banner of love, but this bride is pale, snow pale, and she grows snow cold as he helps her to horse, as the touch of the groom were bale. But she proudly follows the lead of fate, nor once looks back when she passes the gate. Some tuneless souls will meet and make no answering music here, but keep in our low reverberate air the peace of the outer sphere, and passing mix with the silent dead, and leave the word of our life unsaid. But not Glenara's falls at spate with their lusty voice for praise, and not the vocal heart of spring that beats in its covert ways. Not stream or merle or plaining dove went ever so near to utter love as twain who under the marriage tree once heard their voices all, and sent a confluent answer back to the cuckoo's double call. Sudden note so piercing sweet it drowned the waterfall, till with the primrose she grew pale, he wakeful with the nightingale. For all as wise as their hearts had been to know and to claim their own, they saw how oft by the felon world love's dues are overthrown, the world that knows not thine or mine, but snatches a treasure from off a shrine. And so it fell from the deep Argyle had a bargain he would make, and his sister must be the seal of it, should it burn her heart or break. Thus he married her to the slow, the dull, red-bearded tyrant, the chief of Mull. The clansmen saw her where she came in the hold of the red MacLean, who once had ridden more free than free with love at her bridle rein, and passing left them for lingering trace the smile that had flowered on every face. They let her go with never a word, was never a word to say. MacCallum Mor was lord of all, and his will must have its way. Though the heart of the speechless bride was wrath as the torrent roaring beside her path, but when to Cladchey's ferry they came, and the chief had called a halt, while his shaggy train on bite and sup were making swift assault, she lighted down and knelt beside an image of the crucified. There, overborne with the stroke of fate, as droopingly she sunk, she had not known how near her heart there knelt a cowled monk, till he took her hand and whispered low, and she felt it riven with joy and woe. Here was the voice in all the world, for her the only voice, the hand whose touch in face of death had made her sense rejoice, and for these hearts with love so rife, one moment but of common life. Up, love, and fly, for one heart beat love had and held his own. They mingled breath, they mingled tears, a word and he had flown, had carried her over ford and dyke, from Campbells and MacLeans alike. She strove with him, she clasped the cross. Let pine, she said, or die, but never from this forefront of fate tempt me to fail or fly. It has not been laid upon any man but on me to suffer and save the clan. MacCallum More has spared to meet MacLean as in open fight, so awake or asleep in his island keep I must face him day or night. For a true Argyle is but one thing sure, the will and the word of MacCallum More. They look to the right, they look to the left, O fair and cruel world, where tender firstlings of the spring on gusts of March are hurled. The wild wind bent the pine tops tall, it rent the folded leaves and small, the mocking sun laughed down on all. They look to left, they look to right, and lo, through the cloven mist, Loch Awe that laughed to the laughing sun as stormily they kissed. Cold sun, she said, in bitter bliss, dear love, be witness, never kiss of man shall mar the print of this. A heavy freight bore down that day the Cladchey's ferry boat, and one that saw it had liefer seen it founder, I think, than float. Better a bride so foully wed were bedded here in the lake, he said. But the lake would none of them, bride or groom, or scurvy train, and tossed, 'twixt Cladchey's ferry and Brander Pass, the boat that crossed and crossed, and the eyes that hung on the throat of the pass saw, blocking the way of love, the mass of dark Ben Cruachan, or ere they turned in wrath from the path of men, and the wayworn bride by forest and flood, through moss and reedy fen, went, forced on her way in the teeth of the wind by the men of Mull who were trooping behind. They crossed the sound, the dim isle seems adrift in the wind and rain, as cold in the shadow of Castle Duart its sodden shore they gain. But the iron click of the stanchion gate rings home like the closing jaws of fate. Her bower maidens had busked the bride, the feast was long and loud, but she scarce had sat at the board more still had she sat there in her shroud. And her courage failing for wearihead, "'Tis a far cry to Loch Awe," she said. II. The wassail had reached its stormy height, the feast was over in hall, when there came and stood at the lady's side a gloomy seneschal. As he pointed the way to a turret near, she knew it led to the bride's chambere. And she that was Rose of fair Argyle, a white rose she was then, stood up and waited no second sign, but bowed to the roystering men, and passed with her bower maids out of the hall, in the lead of the wordless seneschal. Then some who noted her proud and pale bent laughing over the board. She's as white as a widow's callant, they said, who should wed a maiden sword. And in sooth the Lady Elizabeth had blithelier followed the feet of death than the form which fronting the torch's glare cast a giant shade on the turret stair. And when she stood in her bridal bower, she turned to her maidens twain, "No hand but this of mine may dress the bride of the red MacLean. So lend me but your prayers this night, and fare ye well till the fair daylight." She cast her garments one by one, alone as she stood there. She was to sight no summer flower, but a woman deadly fair. When forth she drew the golden comb and loosed the golden hair, which sheathed her body to her knee, a ringed and burnished panoply. Then as a swimmer with her arms the amber flood she spurned, to either side, and in her hand she took a gem that burned, that rose and fell upon her heart, as a thing that bore in its life a part. 'Twas a golden dragon in jewelled mail, that lay betwixt breast and breast, over that gentle lady's heart, couched as a lance in rest. And that cunning sample of goldsmith's work, it was the handle of a dirk. She drew it forth of its leathern sheath, and she felt its steely edge, then gave some drops of her quick young blood to its point, as if in pledge. Ere she wound her hair in a silken thong, and the dirk in that golden chain and strong, she laid the dragon again to sleep in its balmy place of rest. O God, that a home so soft and fair should harbor such a guest! Then her winsome self she rearrayed, and fell on her trembling knees and prayed. She muttered many an Ave then, and told off many a bead, till her passion sealed her lips for words, but mocked so sore a need. Then she stopped and listened beside the breeze, and only waited upon her knees. And as she listened, the distant sound of wassail ceased, and all her soul rushed armed into her ears at the sound of a dull footfall, which wound its way to the topmost tower, where was the lady's bridal bower. The wind was piping through lock and loop, but of nothing was she ware. There was no sound in all the world but that foot upon the stair. As she listened and heard it rise, her soul rushed armed into her eyes. She stood up white in her snowy pall, a breathing image of death, the torchlight crowning her radiant hair, her sombre face beneath. As I am a virgin pure this night, so keep me, God, through dark to light. As I am a child of the deep Argyle, souls of my fathers, teach me wile. The iron door on its hinges turned, and closed on the married twain, and redder yet from his deep carouse there stood the red MacLean. And their four eyes met, and no word was said, till his glance fell off on the vacant bed. Then she: I have prayed of Mary's grace, that she would us assoil, for that this day with lips forsworn we sought to cut the coil of mortal hate that has ever lain betwixt the Argyle and MacLean. Then low he laughed: To kneel and pray, lady, beseemeth thee, but to make of our false oath a true is the task that fitteth me. My word, before the morrow's sun ye shall avouch the work well done. He moved a step to where she stood, and she recoiled a pace. His wandering eyes again were set in wonder on her face. They paused, they made a mutual stand, his breath fell hot upon her hand. You are a lord of the isles, quoth she, and the isleman's mood is light, but I am a child of the firm mainland, and I change not in a night. There is naught of me that a man may win, and I think not to overlay sin with sin. Now nothing could hap that would make us twain but false as woman and man. Yet by the grace of God we may still be true, each to our name and clan, and each to each in a sidelong way, true to the bond we have sealed this day. You ask for a gage of my feudal chief, but of me nor word nor smile. You sought but to better the strength you had with the strength of the deep Argyle. You shall have your due, but no more of me than a contract seal and warranty. He laughed in his beard. Ay, many have tried, but all have tried in vain, to meet with a measure that was not his, the due of the red MacLean. Still with iron hand he has held his right, but never so close as he willed this night. She set herself as a hind at bay, she straightened her back to the wall. I that am come as a hostage here, would you use me as a thrall? Not so, quoth he, but by limb and life I'll use you as my wedded wife. I am an earl's daughter, she said, and my oath is worth a knight's, and I swear by the health of my mother's soul, that the kiss which first alights on me as we two lie in bed shall have the force to strike me dead. You are an earl's daughter, he said, and a maid without a stain, but as you are here in Castle Duard, and I the red MacLean, that oath shall no more be your screen than if you were the veriest queen. She shrunk as into the granite wall she parried his rude embrace, his fierce eyes glowed like the autumn fern, his breath was hot on her face. Her heart seemed knocking against the stone, it beat as it would burst her zone. She cried a cry, but it fell stillborn, it died in her throat for fear, though the meaning ablaze in the dauntless gaze of her flame blue eyes was clear. And it was that the Lady Elizabeth was ready to give as to take of death. Her hand bore hard on her heaving breast, and he knew whereto it clung, and he saw how her eyes on the turn of his two deadly warders hung. Then his caitiff soul succumbed to hers, he let her go and sprung back, with the cry of a ravening beast balked on the eve of a gory feast. Twice already that tyrant chief had seen the accusing steel, cleaving the way to his savage heart in a victim's last appeal. And he hated more the better he knew the flash of that lightning cold and blue. He glanced at the dagger's golden string, and his sodden wit grew clear. Where to, where to? I will stalk this maid as we stalk the Highland deer. The fumes of wassail that left his brain had left it free to fear. She is yet too wild, he said, and deep, to be taken waking or asleep. He spoke her fair, you have journeyed far by mountain and by flood, and to you of all that life hath dear, sleep only seemeth good. So you shall taste untroubled rest this night, as 'twere a stranger guest. Her left hand sheathed the shining dirk, she gave to him her right. Now lay your sword betwixt us two, as you are a belted knight. Then God be watch and ward, she said, and stretched herself by the sword in bed. And hourly, as the night wore on, she lay in the deepening gloom, her two hands folded upon her breast like a statue on a tomb. But she seemed to feel the dirk beneath her fingers, tingling in its sheath. And the moon came softly out of a cloud i' the midmost of the night, and through the loophole gazed at her, she lying still and white, beside the castle's lord, who slept while she her weary vigil kept. But when the morning's face rose pale o'er the shoulder of Cruachan Ben, she stole from out the bride chambere, a joyful woman then, and alone in face of the risen sun she dared to weep. The day was won. Part III. When the morning board with the rests of the feast was set, and the martial kin, the vassals in chief of the castle's lord, still heavy with sleep, dropped in, they found a smiling chatelaine threading her keys on a silver chain. And still when her lord, like a thundercloud full charged, came lowering down with her own white hand, she served to him the prime of the venison. So tending him in the downward eyes, it hooved him not to speak or rise. Thus every morning she was meek as a loving wife might be, and full of service and soothfastness as a lady of high degree. In a house and hall a guidon's power, a gracious presence in lady's bower. At eventide she graced the feast with a face of merry cheer, and her voice to the harp when the harp went round, as the laverock's note was clear. So she singeth in the night, they say, as a bird that singeth in the day. And seeing her so amenable and lovely in daylight hour, her lord would follow as time might serve for dalliance in lady's bower, where sitting apart on the window stone they parleyed together as if alone. And once, she making the shuttle fly her maiden spinning near, he seized her fluttering hands and laughed, "They are captives, white with fear." "Nay, call them rather," she laughed back, "pale victims, faithful on the rack." And seeing her frail as she was fair, he measured with thievish eye the length of the dirk which clove her breast, and thought where the hilt might lie. But he saw no way through her silken suit, which clipped her close as the rind the fruit. And seeing her fair as she was frail in the sting of a new-born need, his tuneless voice for once rang true, his fierce tongue learnt to plead. Then her daylight face was in eclipse, the shadow of night on her eyes and lips, as she answered him, "While the stars endure, you will get no more of me than what you hold at my brother's hand, for a gift is of the free. That hour which made us two hand fast, the time to win as to woo, was past. You are haggard, dame, as a hawk," he said, and he gave her hands reprieve. But we tamed the wildest tercelet that ever we let live. Then he rose and left the bower in wrath, and the stones cried out upon his path. Craft is the strength of Argyle. She knows our heads are under one hood, but that hood shall be cover for mine alone, if ever me seemeth good. The sleuth hound in vain, if he failed of that, had been held in leash with the mountain cat. Now is better than then, good brother Argyle. New love is like new wine. I will put to the proof this brotherly shield before it is worn too fine. And see, when my hand has done a thing, how you make it good in the eye of the king. He called aloud to his name's men all, as they loitered about the court. Come, rouse ye, men, for a bloody raid, and I warrant ye good sport. The better that we by night shall stoop and seize our prey in a silent swoop. And some of your band must go by land, and some shall come by sea, and those shall ride with Malcolm Moore, and these shall sail with me. Our meeting place Glengarry Bay, the boats, there needs no more to say. Then some to horse and some to ship, some sailed, some rode or ran, while shrill at their head the pipers played the gathering of the clan. The work was death, the road was rough, they knew no more, it was enough. But when they came to Loch na Keal, nor pipe nor voice was heard. You might have caught, as you brushed the ling, the cry of a brooding bird. And a league or ever you reached the shore, have steered by the dull Atlantic roar. Then warily they at Glengarry Bay made sign to the waiting boat, and the word goes round whereto they are bound, as they silently get afloat. And they steal upon Cairnburg's island keep, where it lies in the cradling surf asleep. Then little they heard of the scared sea-bird or the near Atlantic roar, for the fierce war clang of the crossing swords, as led by Malcolm Moore. They stormed the keep, and its keepers slew or laid in irons before. MacLean with his merry men sailed in, safe to conquer and bold to win. He passed the body of Cairnburg's lord with its gaping wounds and red, and he spurned it from him with his foot. He did not fear the dead. Then he filled a horn and gave a toast. We'll drink, quoth he, to our silent host. The thirsty crew swarmed up, they left the dead men in the bound, and drunk with blood in wassail deep their reeling senses drowned. The captive's groans, the victor's glee, the lashing of the ruthless sea, made up the wild world's harmony. O loving God, whom all men loved when hating most their kind, they lifted bloody hands in prayer, now all are stricken blind, and we never more may see the sun till all men's eyes and hearts are one. Then red MacLean set his signet seal on the castle's garnered store, then he filled his pouch with its gold and gave the keys to Malcolm Moore, whom he left in charge, bold man and true, while himself took ship with his jolly crew. And he thought, to this frost-bound maid of mine, when I come red-handed in, will the ice of her virgin pride break up, shall I come as I came, to win? But the spirits that wrought for him by day were not at night, and she held her way. Then he fell in longing by day and night, as the sick man longs for health, and he longed for her by night and day, as the beggar longs for wealth. As one who hung over the pit of hell might clutch at a starbeam ere he fell. And his stricken thought turned round on himself, and his dim low-lying soul caught a shadowy glimpse of a fairer way, as he deemed, to a fairer goal. So a heavier stone on his heart was flung, which helped but to sink him where he hung. He dreamed of tortures of rare device, as to give his passion ease, and once in his dire extremity he sued her upon his knees. But alone, without her Campbell shield, who knows to die, needs not to yield. For bulwark and for last defence she had the strength of steel. The sword betwixt them was a sign, the dagger was a seal, and each fine hair that wound about the dagger's hilt a watchful scout. But sitting alone on the window stone, though still was the summer air, she heard a whispering on the sea, a moaning she knew not where. Then she looked to the hills where the two winds meet, and saw them wrestle together, and beat each against each, and pant and smoke, like beasts that fret an unequal yoke. And she said, "O love, that I knew so fair, whoever had thought of thee, that thy summery breath could raise the storm and the wreck, whose shall it be? Were the end but death, would it now were here, and a white fringed pall on my maiden bier." IV. As the red MacLean went to and fro 'twixt Duard and Cairnburg tower, one day he chanced to spy a rose, it seemed a single flower, with an open eye, but in some closed part the bud was shaping a double heart. And this flower grew up so fresh and fair on land that was held in fief, the Treshnish Isles, which her father owned of MacLean, a vassal chief. And this fair maid, having a vassal soul, of her beauty paid the tyrant toll, and his galled spirit found ease in her from the bond of the proud Argyle, and his famished pride rose up full fed and rampant beneath her smile, that he laughed his laugh, "I will take this flower and plant as a thorn in my lady's bower." So he took the maiden with him in croup, and to Castle Duard they came, where my lady looked her through and through, without or pity or blame. Would God, she thought, this flower would twine and stablish herself in this place of mine. So she let it be, and it wound and wound, it was so soft and young, so lithe as the green shoots felt their way, but they hardened where they clung, till they bent the stake the way they chose, for this plant it was a climbing rose. And the red MacLean, the chief of the clan, to her was the chief of men, and she thought in her pride, could I win to his side as the mists upon Cruachan ben, my matron coif would be borne so high it would shine the first in the great world's eye. Now MacLean in the strength of others is waxed so proud that naught avails, but the ships that traverse the Sound of Mull must lower their topmost sails. When of Duard they come within gunshot, still the woman who called him lord bent not. She looked from the seeming single flower that twined until, none knew how, the tender shoot that had clasped a twig had all but been a bough, to her baffled lord, for his changed desire had held her safe in its counterfire. And he who noted her morning face grow clearer and yet more clear, beheld her the only untamed thing of all that came him near, and his longing was as the thirst for blood, his hate was the hate of fear, and the fear and longing so grew and grew that together they rove his heart in two. And still he saw her the bond that bound Clan Campbell to his name, and knew the issue between them one that for very pride and shame, in his strong walls filled with his vassal kin, his hand unholpen must lose or win. The round world spinning about the sun appeareth a twofold arc, it nothing knoweth of high or low, but only of light and dark, that many dreaming they climb a height, or boring deep in the pitchy night. So the wilding rose it crept and crept, it was so soft and fair, that it wound till it reached the chamber door at the top of the turret stair. As its sweetness weighted the air within, she thought, one night he will tirl the pin, he will open and put my lady forth, he will set me by his side. And so it fell, and my lady rose, and passed in her virgin pride from out of the chamber adown the stair, with a foot as light as a bird of the air. Then the fierce MacLean, when as chatelaine she greeted him from her place, and he caught the tenser tone of her voice, the light on her morning face, was hounded as by the devils in hell to quench the spirit he could not quell, and his limmer, striking deeper root, still darkly wound her way. For she hated who only reigned at night, the woman who ruled by day. And at Castle Duard the fiends full fain went up and down betwixt these twain. Then the limmer made an image of wax, alike in every part, to my lady's self, and when all was done, she stuck it through the heart. "Dwindle and dwine in shade and shine," she said, "till all of thine be mine." And ever beside the waxen shape in the gloaming of the day, with folded hands she crooned the curse as a troubled soul might pray. "Dwindle and dwine in shade and shine, till all be mine that now is thine." In an evil hour the baffled chief looked in as she crooned the spell. He plucked the shroud from the waxen shape. "You have wrought this passing well. My lady's face, and the smile thereof, here hate hath done the work of love. My lady's face as she lives, not so. My lady's face," he said, not as she lives to flout us to, but as she might lie dead." Then each glanced up as in vague surprise, and shrunk at the light in the other's eyes. For the wish that was quick in the woman's breast had mothered the thought of the man, and he said, "Ay, Harry, this work of wax, and the woman you would ban, shall feel the sting in her heart of stone." But his laugh rang hollow, and died a groan. He seized the knife, he struck it anew, he turned in the wounded wax. "Take heed of this bloodless beauty," he said, "that thereof nothing lacks. We will keep this saint as in a shrine, she may be worth your life and mine." He led his limmer forth and turned the key ere he went his gait. If hate can do the work of love, so love the work of hate. Then his fierce heart surged in its beaten pride, as the great wave surged in the high springtide. V. My lady sat in her bower and span from a newly plenished creel. She loved the wild sea noise that drowned the droning of her wheel, nor feared to hear the low winds race through the tall spear grass to their meeting place. But the restless wind awoke her heart where her love was laid asleep, and it rose up wild like a startled child, it waked like a child to weep. O world forlorn in the wan grey weather, and young heart weeping and wailing together! For the wrestling wind recalled a time when the grey wan world was green, when the sun was high, her lost love nigh, and the sting of love so keen. In the stroke that cleft her heart in twain, she knew not if it were joy or pain. The wind, the waves, the droning wheel, no new sound thrilled the air, but her flesh made motion that some strange thing, some loathly to life, stood there. She stopped her wheel, the fine thread broke. It was her lord. He laughed, he spoke. "Wouldst give your thought in my thought's stead, you'd win by the exchange," he said. She turned from him, she locked her hands and laid them athwart her breast. She feared belike his questing gaze from sanctuary might wrest a name she knew the faintest breath betraying would betray to death. "Put by your wheel and spin no more. Come, lady, and come with me. You ever have loved the singing wind, you love the dancing sea. My Beurlin is on the shore, leave flax and fancies, spin no more." His voice was soft, his words were smooth, his eye had a feline glow. You seemed to see it burn more bright that the light was waxing low. He smiled, repeating as before, "Leave flax and fancies, spin no more." She left her wheel, she left her bower, she followed the false MacLean. The piper piped them to the shore, he piped a doleful strain. The pibroch of Macrimmon Moor, the way you go you'll come no more. The chieftain's foster brethren twain hung on the shallop's side, that shook in the breeze as a courser shakes ere he steadies himself in his stride. The lady barely brooked their help in her strength of youth and pride. They backed the boat through the blown sea scurf, and bored her all in the boiling surf. The helm was ta'en of the red MacLean, the oars of Donald Dhu, and Shamish he of the bloody hands, and they were a grisly crew. But my lady's spirit rose bold and free 'twixt the singing wind and the dancing sea. O youth, what art thou for gallant stuff, well known to the fiend Despair? Of him you haply will take of death, but never will doff to care. A gleam of sun, a breath of brine, will mount your pulses as brisk new wine. The good boat breasted the creaming wave, she rose in the teeth of the breeze, she charged again as a fiery steed was stricken aback by the seas. The mountains seemed to soar and dive, the dim world heaved as yet alive. The Norse built keep of Castle Duard, that one while gaunt and bare, looked glowering from its stony height, melted as smoke in air. As faint from chat dissolving shore, the pibroch wailed, "You'll come no more." But where the two winds meet, the drift had loosed a lurid cloud, which floated up as the tide went down, in fashion as a shroud.
or liker to a woman drowned, with arms outspread and hair unbound. As the rowers caught in the lady's eyes a shadow of vague affright, they turned about on their laboring oars to question the waning light, and deep in the downdraft of one thought a moment those four souls were caught. Then looked at her with wolfish eyes, and fierce the red MacLean, then looked at her with conscious eyes, and keen those gillies twain. Their meeting glances quelled her breath, they seemed to smite and deal her death. The pibroch's note was heard no more, the pallid mist had spread O'er all the world, a winding sheet, for all the world seemed dead. The wind and the wave upon its track, shrieking the lost world's coronach, but broadening over their bows they see a line of angry foam, that hard on a bare, nigh sunken rock, with maddening haste beats home. And all the woe that was no more, the dead world's woe, was in its roar. The lady heard, and she rose up pale in the quivering boat upright. It was but the blind young blood that rose. Alas, what hope in flight! What hope of any help might be betwixt the dead world and the sea? And looking ahead where the breakers struck the black, low-lying shore, 'twas a man's hoarse voice that smote her ear, smote through the deafening roar. There one in love with death, it said, might have white sheets for a marriage bed. Then not for tumult of wind or wave that lady's heart beat high. It swung with the dead dull weight of lead, it struck as for danger nigh. A wild alarum, whereat each sense doubled the force of its frail defence. And served by the drift of the landward seas, the boat makes straight for the rock. She shoots the waves, and in the trough lies stunned as if with the shock. Then rights herself, as fearing more the helmsman than the deadly shore. Dumb mid the thunder of wind and surge, the savage helmsman steers. The world enlapsing from out their sight is clamoring at their ears. But through the tumult they can feel the shingles grind a quivering keel, and swept ashore on a towardly wave they haul the good boat in, and without a word the brethren fall to work in the wildering din. Some deadlier task and still to come would seem to hold these brethren dumb. Then swill as strokes of the stormy sea, more rude than the raging wind. The lady is ware of two sudden arms that seize her body and bind, and knows from its beating that dull way the heart her dagger had kept at bay. The red MacLean, none other than he has her in hand at last, and oh, ye smouldering fires of hell, this time he holds her fast. The teeth of the dragon beneath her vest are buried deep in her bleeding breast. He stood with his bride on that trampled shore, they two and they alone, and with brackish kisses he pressed and pressed as one who would make his own her shuddering lips, then he cast her down as a man might cast a stone, and the rock that was all that was left of the world seemed sinking with that light weight so hurled. He turned where the tattered fringe of the sea lighted the falling night. That face on the brown sea ware had shone so ghastly white. He dares the foaming wrath of the surge, he boards his boat as in flight. He shouts, "Haste, brothers, make for the large, the waves are roaring a countercharge." The foster brothers they heave their hearts, loud beating against the prow, but in face of the countervailing sea the labor of man is slow. And somewhat white hangs on to the boat, forbearing the shallop to get afloat. Ah, what but the swift young blood again uprisen as with a cry, the voice of its still aspiring life, not yet is it time to die, has sent my lady in this wild way with grappling hands to plead and pray. He struck her off, the caitiff MacLean, the very breakers had fled, to let her kneel, but there be lost men, and damned or ere they be dead. "Kneel, woman, kneel," said the red MacLean, "and kneel as once I knelt, in vain." The sea in its sovereign strength returned, and took the maid to its breast, then arched itself, a triumphant wave, and bore her high on its crest, to lay the face so ghostly fair unharmed again on the brown sea ware.
My lady rose in the strength of her pride, she saw herself there alone. She rose and blessed the sundering sea, the islet was all her own. She rose and rose to its topmost ledge, she made thereof a throne. She cried, MacLean of Duart, farewell, we're parted now as heaven and hell. No blot on the shrouding mist, MacLean with his whole dark world seemed dead, all, even to the very hate of him, gone like a knotless thread. So that behind, as about, above, was nothing left her but death and love. Then she wept for ruth of her maiden truth, Love, have I waked for thee, by day and night, but to face thee now with this loathed stain on me. Come, ocean, and with your bitter brine sweeten these ravished lips of mine. The hydra heads of the western waves broke, parted to north and south. They lipped the shore, commixed and closed as one vast foaming mouth, that hungered for her evermore, that all but slew her with its roar. And still she called upon love, false love, to think thy summery breath should drive a soul that trusted thee on this wild way of death. The foam fringed rock was wearing small, scarce bigger now than a maiden's pall. The clamoring surges foamed and fell, pressed nearer and yet more near, then plunged and quivered in pale recoil of pity or eke of fear. They broke, they wandered round her seat, they went, they came, they licked her feet. And still she cried, and still she clung, O treacherous sea and slow, come take my life and make an end, since death will have it so. The mad sea melted at her commands, came back and kissed her clinging hands. The charging waves come on, fall off, rise sheer as a wall and steep. O Christ, must the whole dead world go down entombed in the charnel deep? The strong tide lays her bosom bare, she feels it dragging her tangled hair. Her hands have ceased to clasp and cling, she has shaken her spirit free. She will strive no more, she will make no moan, she will go with the clamoring sea. The waves ring only against the rock, but it feels as yielding beneath the shock, and still the breakers lift their crests. O Maiden Mary, she cries, who will tell my lover my heart was true, who will right me in love's eyes? But the hydra heads have come and gone, and in the face of death she still lives on. But they come no more, dear God, so nigh, they come not again, they fall, and trample the rock beside her feet, fierce monsters, but held in thrall, tamed in their very pride's excess to this turbulent show of humbleness. The battle front of the daunted sea, though the waves still chop and churn, is in forced retreat, the wavering tide has trembled long on the turn. Then one white wave came back and surged about her, and her lips were purged, and she lay there washed as for the grave, and purer than virgin snow. Her beauty seemed as a conquering power in this its overthrow. Her eyes were blinded, choked her breath, her ears were open gates of death. A panic seized on the routed waves, they fled to the sandy shelves, they writhed, they foamed, they broke, they turned and foundered upon themselves. But in that maiden was no stir, great love had had his will of her. The terror deepened upon the sea, the stillness grew on the wind. They fled together, these fierce allies, and left their spoil behind. The one sole thing that glimmered white and pure in all that world of night. Part VI. Two shapes passed over the sobbing sea to land at Dunley Bay. One passed at sunrise, one at noon of the new created day. The first was a work of God undone, the second a devil's, but ill begun. And both were silent as outer space, both white as the upper air, as one mask lay to the rising sun, and one to the noonday bare. Broke from the first a gasping breath, shone on the second the beads of death. So the first was laid on the yellow sands to catch the coming of day, and the second was covered up close as night to hide from the noon away. And light of life came into the first, but the second sweltered, a thing accursed.
Through the standing floods, by the lonely ways, in the tracks which the sheep had worn, by Shamish, he of the bloody hands, that spotless lady is borne. But her sleeping sense of his care is fain, and his bloody hands leave never a stain. He had sighted her soul when it rose and sued to his chief at her wild, wide eyes, and the sea and the shore through the livelong night had been ringing as with her cries. And they drew him whether he would or no, with the cords of a man, and he had to go. So he found her there where the sea had laid and left her, but not a sound there breathed from her body as mournfully the waves fell sobbing round. Then a stainless lily, alive or dead, he gathered her up in his hands and fled. Then as bloody Shamish was making the shore and laying that white lady in the sun's warm bed on the yellow sands, MacLean was putting to sea, with the waxen shape that in hate of hell his limmer had molten and made so well. But or ever the seeming widower had come with the seeming dead to Dunley Bay, that first true twain were well on their journey sped. Ben Cruachan behind them, frowning above and blocking the way of the foes of love. Then they hail the ferry and lightly go where heavily erst she came, and the jubilant song of Glenara fell sets her frozen blood aflame. And she lights at the gate, and she seems to win her way like a chartered ghost within. And she glides to her place by the arras screen, and she faces her kinsmen all, for a wandering breath that told of her death had called them together in hall. You must open your hearts as of yore to me, for you get me back at the gift of the sea. They opened their hearts, and they lent their ears to her tale, but on every dirk a hand was locked in a fast embrace, and with promise of wilder work than ever had been in the age-long reign of hate twixt Clan Campbell and Clan MacLean. Then the women swarmed round her and bore her away, as a leaf on the stream at flood. They shrieked wild curses, but eased their hearts with tears while they talked of blood. And my lady who heard was resolving it all in the call of the cuckoo, the song of the fall. But when brave and sweet from her maiden bower she issued again, they had done, and the whole clan rose to the queen of the feast, and she faced them and saw but one, till her thought was drawn to that vanished shore by the ghost of the dirge of Maccrimmon Moor. Faint as a travelling spirit of sound it came and went on the breeze, now low in the valley, now high on the hill, now lost in the leaves of the trees, but ever emerging and ever more near, as men clutched their dirks and bent forward to hear, for they knew of the thing that was like to appear. A lie will be loud in its own defence, as a fearsome heart will be bold, and in every clachan the thing went through, the lie had been told and told, and the doom of the lady lamented o'er in the wild death song of Maccrimmon Moor. Now it wails, it shrieks, it is passing the cross, it has entered the gate, and the beat grows louder and louder, the steady ground tone of an army of tramping feet. Then the great hall fills with a funeral train, in weeds of mourning the false MacLean steps warily close to an open bier, with one downward fiery eye that has found a way through his folded plaid fast fixed on the waxen lie. Then he lifts his hand, and he stops the march of the train in the favouring gloom of an arch. And one clan halts in the cavernous shade, one stands in a bright half ring, by the torch-lit board, each man in his place, but alert and ready to spring, if damnable treason for once overbore the bloodless craft of MacCallum Mor. Then from out the darkness a hollow voice comes deep as the gloom and dull, and the Campbells are fretting like hounds in leash, while the torturous Lord of Mull pours the tale of his loss and his dole in their ears, while his false eyes verily shed false tears. Abide, my brothers, MacCallum Mor has taken his sister's hand, and adown the hall in their Campbell pride they pace together and stand, in a halo of light by the open bier, he waving a burning brand, in the false dead face which wears flat in the flare, as the falser living shrinks back from the glare. But the lady has fronted the men of Argyle, and though never a sign gave she, her heart on another's made silent call, and the twain were suddenly three, she holding inward with her maiden might the armed right hand of her own true knight.
The mourner has turned in his ghastly fear from that deadlier image than death, and lo! on the topmost stair as of life sees the Lady Elizabeth, and the radiant vision had all but slain, as with effluent being, that caitiff MacLean. His lieges are thronging in hall and court, and many bold men and true, but in view of that lady who dazzles their eyes, they cower and tremble too. 'Tis an unkenned sight, and a weird to see a spirit stand clear of its own body. Now MacLean lies bleeding and overthrown in his recreant haste to fly, but MacCallum Mor had foreseen his gain in the life of his false ally, though his fiercer namesmen had all but broke from his cautious hold when his sister spoke. She spoke in her tolerant scorn: "This chief has suffered some wrong of me, which failing to right, he went near to avenge, in the strength of his fear the sea. I stand here victor, let no man dare to take from the vanquished the life I spare." She seized the brand and tossed it alive on the waxen shape where it lay, and the full fed leaped up to the roof, and the night was a brighter day. Then red MacLean, who dabbled with gore, and abject with terror, fled out of the door, to his whilom lady became no more. And she spoke again to her own true love, none hearing but only he: "Forgive that a traitor in love's despite once dared in sight of the sea, but only once, high God he knows, to touch the lips of me, sith the great white wave that broke from above hath made them meet now for death or for love." Then she turned in her pride to her feudal lord, said: "Brother, now give me shrift. I was offered to shame, I was offered to death, as I hold at the sea's free gift my life and love, I will hold them fast, or find me a grave with the true at last." But her brother has taken and joined their hands, and so soothfast was the kiss, so dear love's due to her lips so true, she had like to have died of bliss. Then over her cheek, as she drooped her head, love's banner at last rose red, rose red. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. End of selected poetry on or about the MacLeans, compiled by John Patterson MacLean.